Welcome to Jude, the podcast. I'm David Jude, your host for this show. And on this episode, we dig into a topic that seems to be gaining a lot of momentum. I don't know your thoughts on public schools and the content of education within our school systems, but I know another solution is out there, and I know that people want to learn more about it. And that solution is homeschooling. Now, it feels like, at least to me, homeschooling is a bit of a controversial topic, but it shouldn't be. So in this episode, let's talk with Jennifer Davis. Jennifer is a wife, a mother of 3 beautiful children, an entrepreneur, a farmer, and literally one of the busiest people I think I've ever met. Jennifer was very involved with her kids at school until she felt she needed to make a change for what she felt was for the betterment of her kids. Now Jennifer has found herself as a mentor, a tutor, and many would say an expert, although she may not agree with this, on this particular topic. If you're considering homeschooling, or maybe if you're already doing it, listen in as we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of homeschooling. We'll put some links in our show notes to some resources, which includes Jennifer's homeschooling Facebook group. Hey, listen, she's up to like 4,600 families as part of this group. So if you need some resources for it, what an opportunity. Thank you to our show sponsors. That's Shameless Care. You can find them at shamelesscare.com and DPJ Consulting, dpjconsulting.com. They'll also have links in our show notes. And lastly, listen, thank you to everyone that's listening. Your support is just amazing. Enjoy the show. Off we go. Yeah.
All right.
Cheers. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late. It's typical homeschooler. Yeah. So you know.
So you're the first person to take us up on having drinks while we do the show.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
I'm a fun girl.
Yeah. This is exciting for me. Yeah. Not too many people want to do that. So yeah. We got to get the wine opener, though. Mm-hmm. We've learned our lesson tonight.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Jump over Meyer.
Yeah. I started to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I'd have known you were going to be on time, I would have done that.
Yeah. Sorry.
I should have planned, because we've talked about this 3 or 4 times, but we've never had anybody say, yeah, let's do it. And
yeah,
that's what happens, right?
Yeah. It's perfect for this.
Yeah, it is perfect for this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got a little snacks, but instead we have some bourbon. So
yep. You
chose what? Bullet?
Bullet. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good one. And
then you ruined a Diet Coke with it, but that's okay.
Yeah. I don't usually drink Diet Coke, but I'll make an exception.
Yeah.
It's
well,
pretty good.
We'll get you through.
The bourbon makes it good.
That's right. All right, good enough. So you've always been busy. You're one of the busiest people I know.
Feels like it. Yeah.
Well, it should feel like it. You never stop, I don't think.
I don't. I want to say I like being busy, but I actually don't. I've been working for 20 years to not be busy.
Yeah.
But then when I'm not busy, I feel weird, like depressed almost.
Yeah.
I think I kind of thrive in it. I come from a long line of busy, hard working, always doing something.
But don't you think that every busy person says the same thing?
Well, you know, it's funny because one of the things I hate the most is the excuse that people give for everything in life, which is, oh, I've been so busy, or I was too busy. We're all busy.
Yeah. We're
all busy. Nobody's busier than the rest. Like, we're all busy.
Everybody's busy.
You have to make time for the things that you want and the things that are important. And
yeah, that's a good point. You have to make time for it, because we never stop either. I never stop.
Yeah.
And I say the same thing. I don't want to be busy, but I feel incapable of not being busy.
Yeah.
And just about everybody in my life is like, why don't you slow down? Why don't you do whatever? And yeah. You know, I'll do that. And I want to do that, but I truly don't think I know how to slow down. And I think when I try to slow down, all it does is create this chaos in my brain to try to generate something else to take up time.
Something else to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I just have to admit I'm really uncomfortable not being busy.
Yeah. Same for me too.
Although I crave it. I crave not being busy.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's part of really why I got into yoga and then decided to become a yoga teacher, was because I have been trying to teach myself for 20 years how to slow down and how to be more intentional and how to not be so busy. And, but you know, I think especially for me in the winter, I like to use Sundays as kind of like, okay, I'm still busy. I'm still doing laundry. I'm watching Rachel Ray. I'm planning the meals for the week and the grocery list. But that's not really busy for me, like a typical day. So that's kind of like downtime for me. And then like the wintertime is when I really do like to kind of have that, you know, okay, let's have one day where we're not so busy.
Yeah.
But you know, for me, the thing that I don't like the most is the running, the like constantly driving in Lexington, being in the truck, that kind of busy. If I can just be home, then I'm fine with being busy at projects or work or cleaning or whatever.
Yeah. I guess we would be the same. We find the solitude, I guess is the word in the home projects.
Yep.
Now, admittedly, I suck at laundry and clean. I don't. Let me just be honest. So everybody knows that I'm not trying to take any credit for anything that I don't do, but I suck at doing those things. But, you know, for me, I guess it'd be mowing the grass or, you know, just taking care of little projects. But I think that's where we find our solitude also, is trying to slow down by doing that. But
Taking care of your space.
Taking care of your space. Yeah. But it never seems to go away. It's always there.
Yeah.
I dirty up the clothes and the dishes, you know, by the end of the same day.
Yeah. It's constant. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I've just always thought about that of all the people that are busy. You know, I look at you and say, you got to be one of the busiest people I know that would relate to it. So,
yeah, I am busy. It's a lot of juggling. But yeah, like we said, I kind of feel like my personality sort of thrives that way, that I don't know how to not be. And it's what makes everything work. Like if I stop, then the pieces will start to sort of fall out of place. Yeah. And also I'm really type A. So I feel better when I see things are done. Yeah. You know, I can't sit and see that there's things that need to be done. So, you know, okay, yeah, I don't really want to go and do this, clean this room or organize this or go through this or whatever it is I have to do. But then when I'm done, that's when I feel my relief. That's when I'm like, oh, and I'm like bragging on myself the whole rest of the night, like telling my husband, do you like how good I cleaned it? Look at how organized this. Do you know I did this? It satisfies me. It's very satisfying, you know, to me. So
I know stress is like the super bad word of life, but do you think that you thrive in the stress of it? Is it the stress that pushes you to be that way?
No, I do think it's just the productivity. And like I said, I come from a very long line of people like that. And my dad is 76 and he still works. He doesn't work full time, but he still has his hands in all kinds of different things and he's very active. And I've just sort of grown up in this culture of family where it's like when you stop, you die. So you don't stop. You keep going. And it pays off. I mean, you know, just like it pays off for you and your wife. You guys have a nice house. You have nice things. You have a business. I mean, you know, it's like you can't just stop. You know, you have to keep going. Like, what's the point?
Yeah, a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
I believe in, you know, lifelong learning. And I was thinking of that over the weekend, that I hope I never get to a point where I quit pushing myself to learn. And I feel like the older I get, and I feel like I'll say the smarter, the wiser. Yeah. The more educated and wiser I try to become, the less educated and wiser I realize that I am.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly in this place of, hey, you got to keep pushing to do it.
Right.
Yeah. For me, I guess with the stress part, you know, no one wants to carry stress, but I think for my work, I find myself operating at my best when there's an emergency fire, emergency stress,
kind of
a deadline, or you've kicked the can to the last possible place, and now you've got to just go get it done, type of thing. And I don't want to work that way, but I also recognize I've got many years of that, and I would tell you that I'm not comfortable there, and I would tell you that I don't want it to be there, but it seems I just march myself right down that path every time.
Yeah, maybe you're good at it.
I suppose.
And that's, I mean, and that's like I think a really good quality. And I think in some ways that's, you know, how I'm too, is that you can handle and react when there is an emergency or there's a stress or there's like something. Like I'm a doer. That's one thing I can't stand is I can't stand for everybody to complain and talk about a problem. And, like meetings, I mean, how many meetings have we all sat in where it's like, oh, blah, 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 and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, so solution time, like I'm like a doer. I want to fix it, solve it, move on through it. I don't like to sit in it,
Right.
And I think the other thing too is I was thinking when you were talking that, I think I also get bored easily.
Yeah.
So if I'm not exceptionally busy, then I get bored, and bored really turns into like depression for me, and not like long bouts of depression because I don't let myself stay bored, but it like makes me feel sort of sad or pointless, or I don't know, just kind of invokes feelings in me of like, what are you doing? Why are you just laying here? Like I really just can't lay around unless I'm sick.
Yeah.
That's about the only time I can do it. Or if I'm by the pool. Now, there is an exception to this. If I'm laying by the pool, which is one of my favorite activities in the summer, but then I always am like reading or working on my phone or watching my daughter. So I still like feel like I'm still doing something. I'm not just out there, just hanging out.
I chuckled when you said you like to get things done, because I think that would be my biggest fault for me is I tend to overanalyze. Mm-hmm. And I'll think on something for probably too long.
Yeah.
It works for me. And it's also a long, many number of years that's been my style of figuring things out. But I'm also very comfortable when I do get to a decision.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's well thought out most times, or as informed as I think I can be. And then, at some point you got to make a decision. So yeah, that's always for the office. That's always a fun topic for like, oh my gosh, here you go again. Analyzing how many ice cubes are in this bourbon or something like that. Is that the optimal number for?
Right. Is this the best choice?
Yeah.
I'm the same way. Yeah. I can't go into anything without just all the information.
That's right.
But I think that's a really good quality in people. It's like, think through your decisions, think through what you're doing, don't just go at life, like whatever. And I do kind of wish, sometimes I have friends who are very go with the flow. And, you see that and you admire that. And I think sometimes I attract friends like that because I'm like, I want to have that in my life. I want to have some of that go with the flow. But then, going through life, I've seen like, oh, but there is so much advantage to being organized and having a plan and then it being executed. Like we can still be spontaneous, but be smart about it.
I admire some people that are able to be rash about their decision making in their lives, because there's something interesting and cool about their abilities to do that. And they seem to fly through the life on the seat of their pants. Yeah. But I guess some days I'm like, that'd be all right. But no, there's not a chance that I could do it.
Me either. Not even one day. Not even one day.
No.
I don't think I could either. Nope. It's not who I am.
So let's talk about your kids just a little bit. So now your oldest son, your middle son.
My middle son, yeah.
You have 3 kids, is that right?
Yes. I have an 18-year-old son and then a 13-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. So I met them the other day. Yeah. So now your 13-year-old son just got to participate in the Thriller Parade. Am I saying that right?
The Thriller, it's the Thriller Parade. It's more like a big event at this point, the Thriller event. And yes. And he and I started doing that. I was trying to figure out the other day. I think it was in 2018. And I had just had my daughter, and my mom kept saying, you and Houston should do the Thriller, because I always loved to dance. And then my kids were little, we'd always dance to music. That was like kind of a Friday night activity. We'll crank up music, most of the time Michael Jackson. Yeah. And dance in the living room. And Houston would always run in his bedroom and like throw on some little suit that he had, and he'd come in with his sunglasses and his hat and kick his little feet. He was so little and tiny and cute. And he was like my baby. So when my daughter came along, I was like really trying to think like, how do I keep connecting still with my baby boy that's been so close to me for such a long time? And so we decided to do the Thriller. So he and I danced the Thriller in 2018 and 2019 together.
Downtown in Lexington.
In downtown Lexington on Main Street. Yeah. And it was just great. Like he was so cute. He did such a good job. He wasn't scared at all. Went to all the practices and everything. And cause you practice for a whole month leading up to the event.
Do you really?
You do. They offer 3 practices a week, and we usually would try to go to 2 of them. And
I thought that was just a collection. Like you just come down and
anybody can do it, but you do have to, they only require that you come to one regular practice and one staging rehearsal. But in all honesty, that's not enough for anybody. Like even if you're a professional dancer, you need more than that.
Yeah.
So we would go like at least twice a week. And it was such a good bonding experience for us. And it was so fun. And so we did it those 2 years. And then 2020, 2021, they were doing it with masks and all the things. And so we decided to sit those 2 years out.
Right.
We'll comment on that. But the following year.
We'll get the bourbon going.
So 2022, we joined them again. And my husband actually danced with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
So the three of us did. It was great. And this past summer, I kept telling Houston, Houston, I really think if you would practice and prepare, that I think you could try out for one of the Michael roles. So they let Michaels come in and audition. And they usually will pick between, I think, like maybe 4 and 6 Michaels, because there's so many people who participate, they'll separate you into groups. So they have.
I had wondered about that,
Yeah.
right? You know, I didn't even know you did all this. I just thought you showed up.
Yeah, no, it's a whole production. It's done by Mecca, which is a dance studio here in Lexington, and they've done it for 22 years, and they partner with Lexington Parks and Rec. But Mecca is who puts on the production, teaches the classes. They do a phenomenal job. This was their 22nd year. And, I was really encouraging him to do that because, he was dancing at the house and he was getting some moves down, and he had learned how to moonwalk over this past year. And he's really, really good at the moonwalk. So, Houston has always kind of lacked confidence, especially now he's 13. So he's been coming, into those years and really lacking a lot of confidence. And, I just kept saying, no, I think you should do this. You should do this. So he was like, kind of grew on him. So he auditioned and he got one of the parts, and he's the youngest of the group this year. I think the next youngest to him is a senior in high school. The rest are adults. And, so he's been so into it. I mean, he's wanted to go to every single practice. The Michaels show up a little early to kind of do their thing. He jumped right in, both feet. All of a sudden we were seeing leadership in him that we had not, like this confidence suddenly, just literally was suddenly there.
Yeah.
And he was showing up to practices and like, here, do you want me to get on the stage and lead the group? And, oh, here, I'll stand here. And there's like, just a perfect example, of what I'm sure Mecca would love everybody that comes in on the cast to do. And, I was not able to take him to the practices this year because of a conflict with my daughters, after, her extracurricular activities. So my husband was taking him. And he was still practicing at home. Like he's been practicing every day. He's been kind of building that into his homeschool day. He'll come up and be like, I'm going to go dance for 30 or 45 minutes. He's been wearing suits for weeks. So most of the time you see Houston now, he's in a suit. We get a big kick out of it. It's so cute though, because he always looks so nice and professional now, and which is unusual for a 13-year-old boy to look that way. And I could see him, doing moves at the house, but my husband was like, you're not going to believe it when you see him. And so yesterday we finally got to do the event. It was postponed from last weekend. So, they did it yesterday.
I was wondering why it was moved.
Yeah. And that was a whole thing, not really worth talking about.
Yeah.
But, so yesterday was our big day, and each Michael has their own group of zombies. The zombies sign up for whatever Michael they want. And Houston had a lot of zombies sign up for him, people that had watched him do all the practices and families that wanted to be in his group. And so they do the parade. But then before the parade, Mecca sets up a stage and they perform, like the people who go to their dance studio do some performances. They bring in some other dance troupes from Lexington to perform. And at the last minute, they asked Houston if he would lead the children's group for the showcase on stage. And of course he was like all about it. So he got up there, and I mean, it just literally just blew me away because I had not seen him do the full dance in that capacity since 5 weeks ago. And I cannot believe where he's at 5 weeks from now.
Yeah.
And the crowd just absolutely loved it. I mean, today I've just been like beaming. I thought my heart was going to explode yesterday. I was like bawling, crying. And, yeah, so we're going to try to keep him dancing. We're going to find, we think we may have found a place today that was a good fit. So,
and he's interested in it.
Yeah, he is. We're going to see where that goes. And I mean, he's really that good. And I know it's bad because everyone's like, well, it's my kid, right?
Yeah, but the proud mom.
Go to Facebook, check him out. Yeah. I mean, like he's really very, very good. And especially since he's only 13. And then it's just the confidence that I've seen in him. Like this has just been like this transformation, and seeing him walk around yesterday. He wanted to walk around and talk to the crowd and engage the children. And, people were asking him to take pictures, and he was just interacting with the adults so well that the crowd loved him. So I was like, yeah, we've got something going here now.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
This has been a really cool experience.
So were you a performer of any kind? I mean,
I wasn't. I always liked to dance. I was involved in something when I was 4 years old. That was really awesome. And I was the youngest Miss Majorette of Kentucky. And I know, right? So to be proud of. And my parents let me do it a year, and then they took me out of it. Yeah. But, we're talking back in 1983.
Well, just a few years ago.
Yes, a few years ago. And it was expensive, and it was a very big commitment. And my parents were, very work driven and had a lot going on, and it just.
Yeah, I get that.
So no, after that, I never really got to do a lot, but I would always dance, and, I danced with my granddad, and that's always kind of been my thing to dance.
But your husband plays music? Or
yeah,
play music,
that's how we met. Yep. Yeah. I was dancing and he was drumming. So there you go. Yeah. Now we got a little dancing son.
Atta girl.
Yeah. And our daughter dances too. She's on the competition dance team with Lexington Dance Factory here in Lexington. She got recommended for that last year. And so she's doing that this year, and we're kind of seeing what that looks like.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're getting to have the opportunities that I kind of felt like I always wished I had been able to do. But I guess now I get to enjoy them doing it.
That's right.
It's something. Yeah.
Sometimes you got to live through them, right?
Yeah. So.
Did you get the recruiter issue straightened out? You don't have to get too deep into it unless you just want to. But...
I did. My son took care of that. So
did he?
He did. Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
He'll be able to make his decision soon enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He made the right one for himself. So that made me happy.
Good. That's the end of the day. That's what you're after. Making the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you want to get into some of the homeschooling stuff?
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm not really sure a whole lot about it. I think that's the point of it. And I think it's interesting to talk about. And I think it's when we talked about having this topic here, to me, homeschooling seems like such a hot button or hot topic to talk about. And I don't really understand why it is, but sure seems that way.
Yeah, it is. I think for a lot of reasons. One thing that comes immediately to mind is that, well, a few things. One thing is it's uncomfortable for people whenever they go against the grain or go against what just seems like, we grow up and it's like, okay, this is what we do. This is how we do it. And this is what we do. And it's very hard for people to choose alternatives. And you usually have to have a really big reason, like a really strong passion or reason as to why you're going to go against everything that you've always been told. Because I wasn't homeschooled. My husband was not homeschooled. We didn't even know any homeschoolers growing up. Neither my husband or I, either one. We didn't know any homeschool families. And kind of feel like when I was growing up, occasionally I would hear people mention homeschooling, and there was always sort of like this opinion that homeschoolers were like hippies or like extreme religious groups, that, like who would do that? Who would even attempt that? And
yeah, I don't even know if I know. I don't know at what point in my life I ever learned of homeschooling. I think it was way late, maybe even with Amanda here to learn about homeschooling. I don't know if that's ever even crossed my mind.
Yeah. And the community was very small, and I think most homeschoolers for a long time sort of fit in only one or two categories. And so, people just weren't used to it. Like you said, you didn't know any people that homeschooled. You never really heard of it. So like people don't grow up thinking, oh, I should homeschool. It's a very abstract idea. But
that seems to be changing though, right?
Very much so since the pandemic. The pandemic has changed all of that. And we were homeschooling before the pandemic, and homeschooling was not in my plan at all. That was not something that I was like, oh, I'm going to be a homeschooler. And when my 13-year-old was born, because I've always worked, well, at least for the last 20, almost 25 years, I have worked for my family and their businesses. So I was able to take the children to work with me. I was able to do both. Like I could work and have my children with me. And so Houston never went to daycare. He never, did any of those kinds of things. He was literally with me all the time. He was my miracle baby. So, it was very difficult for me to separate myself from Houston. And Houston had some differences about him. And so when we started talking about him going to school, because I had already went through that process with my stepson, and then also with my 18-year-old, who is my adopted son. We had already gone through seeing like the public school. I was very, very involved at the public school. I was always PTA president or PTA treasurer on the SBDM committee or the volunteer, always. I did not feel like that was a good fit for Houston individually. And so we kind of started looking at alternative ideas, and I'm not actually trying to remember. I can't even remember how we discovered Veritas. So Veritas Christian Academy is a very small, what they call cottage school here in Lexington. And the year that we enrolled Houston there, the first year, I think that it was just their third year being open as a little school. And what they offer is like a homeschool hybrid program. So technically, as far as the government's concerned, you're still homeschooling, and that you still have to do everything the same as if you were just a straight up homeschooler. But you could send your child there for 2 or 3 days, and they would teach them. And then on the days that they were at home, you would do the work with them, and you would still have to do some teaching, but the teaching was very minimal. It was more of like making sure the work was getting done, helping, to facilitate that and create that environment. And especially when they're younger, you had to do a lot more hands-on. But then as they got older, and if they had been in a program like that for a long time, then by the time they're in 3rd or 4th grade, they're pretty much doing their own thing. Like you're literally just making sure. So it seemed like a really good fit for us because it was still going to give me like 2 days a week with no children. And then because I was still working for family, he could continue to go to work with me and do the work. And there was myself, my mom, and my dad all working together. Everybody could sort of, chip in on that. And so we did that with Houston right off the bat. And so Houston has been homeschooled for 10 years. He started doing preschool there and went all the way up. And then we had decided his 5th grade year there that we were going to go ahead and pull him out for 6th grade. The following year he wouldn't go there, and that we would just do straight up regular homeschooling, that I would provide the curriculum and do all that kind of stuff. And lucky for us, we had already made that decision in January, and this was January of 2020. So it was nice for us because that decision had already been a firm decision that was made in our household. So when all the drama went down in March, marching into April, it didn't really affect my household that much because
drama about what? I mean,
as far as the pandemic, as far as shutting the schools down, the world changing, So that decision had already been a firm decision made for Houston. He had already been homeschooling. It was just, he's not going to go to Veritas now 2 days a week. So it was really good for him because at the time, especially Houston didn't do really well with a lot of change. And so I was so glad that we already had that. We didn't have to go through that turmoil of like, are they going to go back to school? Yes, they are. No, they're not. Yes, they are. Now they're going to wear masks. No, they're not. And during that same month when they decided to go ahead and take all of the schools, shut the schools down and take them to online classes, my older son was a freshman at Frederick Douglass here in Lexington.
Okay.
And I got to see a lot more there for a couple weeks of what exactly he was learning, what was being taught. He was really frustrated because they were having a lot of hiccups those first few weeks with the online pieces because they were thrown into it,
Sure.
Which is fair,
That's right.
It was a new thing for them. But I got to really see a lot more of what the topics were and what classes were teaching what. And he was really struggling with a particular assignment. And he kept calling me over and saying, Mom, I don't understand these questions. He said, I feel like the questions are trying to confuse me. I said, okay. So what is the question? He said, well, one of these questions says, is it only okay to kill animals for food? Yes or no? I thought that was an odd question.
It is an odd question.
And he said, well, I think that people should be allowed to like hunt, Mom, like even if they're not going to eat the meat, like, if they want to hunt, it's an animal, they're allowed to hunt, for sport. But I'm confused by the way they worded this question. Like, which way do I answer to, that? There's a couple more questions like that. And finally I said, what class is this for? Because it just felt like that the questions were not exactly appropriate for the school to be engaging in. I felt like these were more like conversations that should be taking place in the home with the family and what aligned more with the family's values and morals and belief systems. And he said, geometry. And I was like, geometry, huh? Okay.
So the animal question is a geometry class.
It was a whole list of social questions, like kind of like, cultural and social questions. And I looked at his geometry grade and he had a D, which in our household was never like it's A's and B's. That's the standard we have. If you can't do that, you can't have any extra electronic time. And I was like, man, he's struggling at geometry, which is always, math was always one of his better subjects. And I was like, and they're sending these questions about whether it's right to hunt animals. And he was having all this frustration. And I just said, I could see the writing on the wall. I knew that it was going to be a disaster over, are they going to go back? Are they not going to go back? And I just said, you know what? We're done. And because I had already been homeschooling for a long period of time, I feel fortunate because it was very easy for me to make that decision. It was not easy for other families to do that.
Right.
For me, it was easier because I knew exactly what homeschooling looked like. I knew exactly how to do it. It was just like, okay, well, now you're going to be homeschooled too. And I was literally emailing the school the very next day, telling them that we were withdrawing him.
So I think that's an important place for us to maybe ask a couple intermediary questions before we jump into it a little bit, right? Because I think part of what you and I are talking about tonight is this serving as a guide to other listeners who may have been considering it and, maybe, I'm hearing a lot about this. I'm not sure if I want to do it. I don't know what it looks like. I'm afraid to pull the trigger, right? Because we went to public school. My kids go to public school. What's wrong with public schools?
Yeah.
All those things. So let's back up just a piece.
Okay.
And let's get back to what is homeschooling? I know it's a basic question. Yeah. But what is it? What does it mean?
Yeah. So I think, and I've been thinking about this some today. So one thing I'd like to say about homeschooling is this. It's actually not a new or a novel idea. And it's amazing to me that people don't realize that. So for thousands and thousands of years.
So I would say it is. Because I don't know, right?
For thousands and thousands of years, this is how people have been educated. And, when you look in history and antiquity, only the wealthy or those who were like of some sort of royal status or some sort of higher status in a society were even allowed an education, right? It was very much a privilege. And you look back at, well, how did they teach them? What did they teach them, right? And there were certain things that were taught to the men as opposed to the women. Obviously, we all know, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic would be our basics. If you can't read or write and do at least some math, and, that's sort of a guide for being intelligent or at least being educated. And then, a lot of things that would have been thrown in, especially antiquity, would have been learning a foreign language. Playing an instrument for the men and the women. For the men, it would have been doing either some sort of jousting with a sword or using some sort of firearm. For women, it would have been things like sewing, knowing proper etiquette as far as manners, how to set tables. Even if those women didn't set tables themselves, they still would know that, what is the proper way of doing those things, how to run a household. Also too, depending on that person's station, then politics would have also come in too, depending on what was that family involved in, what would that person may grow up and be. Then they would be taught, political things. And then history, that was always sort of a marker too. And so, a lot of times people were brought into households to teach. There would be a teacher that would be brought in to teach, maybe not even all the children, but, some of the children. And the one thing I was thinking today that I thought would be really prudent to share here is that, when people think, well, are we allowed to leave the government schools? And hell yes, you're allowed to leave the government schools. And especially if you're in Kentucky, we're really blessed to have very clear and very conservative laws that are not prohibitive for homeschooling. And one thing I tell people is that, do you realize that government schools is a very new idea when we're looking at history as a whole? And I can give you a really excellent example of that. My grandparents did not go to government schools. So my last grandparent just died, and she died at 91 and a half, this just a couple months ago in August. And so all of my grandparents were in that range, right? If they were still alive, they'd have probably been close to 100 now. So let's just say, for math's sake, we're talking around 90 to 100 years ago. They all lived in Kentucky. My papa grew up down close to Clay City. My dad's mom grew up in Butcher Holler down in Paintsville. My granddad was from Ape Yard, Kentucky, which is in Laurel County. And my grandmother lived in Hazel Green, which was also in Laurel County. And none of them went to government schools. So the only time my grandmother that just passed went to government schools, her family moved to Baltimore for a little while. She went to government school there. So I think it's important for people to understand that when we're talking, even 75, 80 years ago in Kentucky, not every county or city or, community had government schooling. Only the larger cities were starting to have that.
Interesting. You're calling it government schooling. I've never appreciated that term, and I'm following you through the conversation, of course, but, go a little further on. I've never thought of it as being a government school
would be a government funded school. Yeah. So, taxpayer funded, that the government is in charge of, the taxpayer money is funding. The government would also be, as we know now, it still has a lot of control over what that looks like, as far as the content and the setup and how it works and safety measures. And
so, the Department of Education was created when, in 19?
That I'm not sure about. We'd have to look that up. So
Eisenhower, I think.
Well, and I know when you look up some of the history on the government schools and when they really became a thing, my understanding too is that there was a big push during World War I and World War II for that.
Holy crap, I was way off. Look at that.
1979.
October 17th, 1979, Congress passed the Department of Education Organization Act, created by combining offices from several federal agencies. So that's Jimmy Carter? Do I have my history right?
Federal Department of Education, yeah.
Yeah, right. Federal Department of Education.
1979, which I would have actually, if I'd had to guess, would have guessed long before then.
So you're thinking about hiring a private investigator, huh? Think knowledge, experience, and trust. Think DPJ Consulting. Listen, we're the folks you want on your team. Whether it's a criminal matter, corporate, or administrative issue, or maybe something more personal, you need to make the right choice for you. Our house of expertise at DPJ Consulting can help you with investigations, and that could mean a whole lot of different things. Pre-employment background checks, personal VIP security, and so much more. Check us out at dpjconsulting.com. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, or give us a call at 855-TEAM-DPJ. That's 855-TEAM-DPJ. Give us a call. It costs nothing to talk. It costs you everything if we don't. Yeah, I was thinking too. It seems like I heard something not too long ago that it was, like I said, I thought it was in like 54 or something like that. That it was created,
so when you look at, and I saw this really interesting meme the other day. So when you start to look at it, you have to start thinking, well, some of our greatest presidents didn't go to government schools. They were home educated or community educated, which is what my grandparents did. So when my grandparents went to school, they went to what would be referred to as community schools. So it would be, my granny that grew up in Butcher Holler is a good example. She went to a community school that was in Butcher Holler, be like a one-room classroom kind of deal. Mm-hmm. So the age range would have been literally, kindergarten through whatever. And they would have a teacher. And, your teacher literally could have been whatever woman was in that community that that was educated in some way, could read, was smart, was willing to do it. Community would pay for that. And there's your school. There wasn't like the public school. There wasn't a government school. It wasn't required to go to school. And my dad's mom she had, there was 18 children total. 2 died very close to birth. So 16 surviving. They were just dirt poor. And she used to tell us growing up that she always felt very, very fortunate because she said, Mommy and Daddy let me go to school longer than the others. And it's funny because when you get in that part of the state, they always say Mommy and Daddy,
right,
even when they get older.
Right.
But she was she was very grateful of that because she liked to go to school. She liked to read. She liked to learn. And what she, told us was that they didn't let the boys go very long. Once the boys were getting about 15, 16 years old, they pulled them out. They would work at the house, work on the farm, whatever it was that was needed. And then a lot of times they would lie about their ages at 17 just to go ahead and enter the military. And they were kicked out. I mean, it was literally like, okay, you're 16, you're out. You got to go. Like, go make your own life, go to the military, go find work somewhere. So they did not get to finish what we would consider now, a full education. And my grandmother was very happy and proud of the fact that they allowed her to stay and finish, what would have been finishing at the time.
I was fortunate to record a show with my mom. My mom and dad are from the southernmost part of West Virginia, McDowell County, which is the coal mining, coal mining area. And I think 7 of the top 10 poorest counties in America are in southern West Virginia. And so I was fortunate enough to travel back with Dad to see some stuff. And then I recorded a show with Mom just to record her life, which is pretty cool. And so to the point, I've never considered government schools, right? I get the concept of coal mining camps and the company store and that whole cycle of the company script and keeping the money there. But Mom was talking about the same thing with the schools. But, I didn't ask her about she graduated.
Right.
They had high schools there that they went to, but I never really thought about where the elementary is. Like,
my guess is that if it was close to a big coal mining camp, then the coal mining company could have very likely been providing the school as well. So they would have paid for the teacher. That would have probably been considered a part of the coal miner's salary.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. And so, that's the thing. When people start to really think of it that way, it's like, well, actually, government schools is the novel idea. It's the new idea. It has not been around long enough to set the, hard set in stone standard of education because, we look through antiquity, look at all these amazing people, all these very intelligent people who wouldn't have went to a government funded school.
So I was trying to do a little bit of research today, so I wasn't completely ignorant when you sit in front of me. So to try to do you some justice. And so I got on the Kentucky Department of Education website, and there's some phrasing here that I found very interesting. And I'll be curious. And of course, you probably already know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to read 2 or 3 different sentences here.
Okay.
And really, I think as far as homeschool, they have like one page.
It's very simple.
Very simple. Yeah. And it says, for a variety of academic and non-academic factors, some parents believe in the benefits of homeschooling their child. And it goes on to say a couple other things. The rights of the parent. The Kentucky Constitution establishes the prerogatives of the parents to choose the formal education for the child. Therefore, parents may choose to homeschool their child. If a parent chooses this option, they take complete responsibility for educating their child. And then we'll come back. There's no state financial assistance for families, which is a whole other topic we'll get into in a second. But when I read that, I thought, that's some really interesting language for our state to put on their website about homeschooling. Some parents believe. I don't know. And that's sort of the opinion of the establishment. I can definitely tell you that. So you don't have to say it. I'll say it. But it's kind of like a passive aggressive poke at those who choose to homeschool. So to your point of government schools,
right,
of which I've never considered it, but sure enough, it is. It's ran by tax funding, right? The tax money is what keeps the schools going. So it's easy to make that nexus, right?
And it's also not just dictated by the state. It's also dictated by the federal government. So, the state is very beholden to the federal government to get the money from the feds to continue to support the schools. At least in Kentucky could not support their schools without the assistance of the federal money. And so there's a lot that goes into that. So, and we see the politicians over time really manipulate that. I mean, I'm going to think back when because, like I said, I always went to public school. I did go to private school for a little bit, but just for like a year and a half in high school. But most of my time was spent in public school. I remember when I was a kid, there was a big argument that ensued again over how should sex education be taught in the school system. And during that time, I would have been in elementary school, and George Bush was president. And the Republicans, of course, had a very staunch position that, sex ed should be kept to the bare minimum, that, certain things should absolutely not be mentioned no matter what. And what would happen is every time an administration would change, then we would revisit this topic. Okay. They're still arguing this topic. What is the baseline for sex education? Like, should we talk about condoms or should we not talk about condoms? If we do, what age should we do that? Here's how that works. If the federal government's position is that this is what we talk about in sex education, you are not allowed to discuss anything else. If a public school in a certain state wants to go rogue and discuss those topics anyways, it can affect their federal funding. So the federal government is very much in control when it comes to these kinds of topics, because the state cannot go rogue and deviate from that, or it could cause them to lose their federal money and they lose their schools. I mean, the schools hold on by a thread. Sure. I mean, by a thread these days. I mean, it's, and it's getting worse, as we all know. We see this especially with all the politicians rearing up right now for the election. They're working on a very thin budget. Now, let me say something about that. They're actually not working on a thin, but they actually are giving a lot of money, but it never seems to be enough. Right. But that's probably a topic for another day.
Yeah, that's right.
But nonetheless, they cannot lose the federal money. If they lose the federal money, I mean, it would be a disaster.
Right.
So so it's not just the state dictating, it's also the federal government dictating it.
Let's talk a minute about sex. Sex is part of life. It's beautiful and it's essential to living a great life. Enter my friends at Shameless Care, who have created something cool for your personal health care. Shameless Care offers a variety of products you may be interested in. ED treatments, STI treatments, STD testing. So how does it work? Well, that's the easy part. You go to shamelesscare.com, you choose the product you're interested in, you complete an online questionnaire, which is reviewed by a medical doctor, by the way. Pay for the product, and in a couple of days, discreet packaging arrives right to your doorstep. Their customer service is second to none. They're always responsive, and they care. Listen, Ashley's the best. Tell her I said hello. They're a small business ran by people like you and me, and they're incredible. And the best part? We can save you some money. Click on the link in the show notes. Use the code JUDE at checkout. It's JUDE. And save $30 on your first purchase. That's not bad, huh? Visit our website to learn more. Shamelesscare.com. And don't forget the promo code JUDE. So is it safe to say then that the federal government is determining the curriculum that will be taught?
So
in public schools we're talking about.
They dictate and determine the guidelines for that. So we've been under Common Core standards for, I'm not sure how long it's been now. Amanda might be able to look that up. We've been operating under Common Core standards for a long time. That's sort of
let's go step two. So what is Common Core?
So that's like a guidepost. Okay. And I don't want to say it's vague, because it's actually not vague. If you go to pull it up for your grade, if you go, I want to see what the Common Core standards are for first grade, you're going to literally pull up at potentially 100-page document. But when you go in and start reading it, so say like for kindergarten, a Common Core standard could something be as simple as saying, by the end of the school year, this child should be able to read and identify numbers 1 through 50 or 1 through 100 or something like that. So it's setting these these guides, these standards that they're saying should be met for each school year.
So it says it's an initiative from 2010 that details what kindergarten through 12th grade students throughout the United States should know in English language arts and mathematics at the conclusion of each school grade.
Right. So when you have a teacher, and of course, when I say all this, I'm only going to be talking about my knowledge of Kentucky. I cannot speak about other states because it does vary. So, in Kentucky, the way this works, and I know this from personal experience of dealing, my stepson lived with us for several years, and I, of course, then oversaw his education during that time, and he was in public school, and then my now 18-year-old was in public school for most of his time. I had a lot of conversations at school. I told you I was very, very active at the school, and I also was very interested in what my children were being taught. So I got to know the principals very, very well. We had a lot of conversations, especially when they got to the middle school ages, about what are we learning here? Why are we reading this? What is the point of this? And the thing that I learned is that teachers have a lot more determination over that than I think the general public realizes. I think that in people's minds, they think just that. The federal government has outlined this. This is exactly what they do. And it's the same for everybody. And it is absolutely not the same for everybody. So let's take a middle school, for example. Let's take sixth grade. Let's say that particular school has 5 sixth grade classes. In theory, every child in the sixth grade that year should be learning the same exact things, right? Mm-hmm. They don't. It depends on the teacher. Depends on what the teacher, because the teacher has to follow the Common Core standards, but they can get there in any route they want to. So they can choose the curriculum. They can choose the vehicle of how they get there, as long as they're covering and trying to hit those guideposts in the standards. So that is very unfair. And you see that unfairness when you look at a district as a whole, because, even in the same school, you see that unfairness, but especially when you're looking at a district. If I pay the same taxes as you do, David, we both say, I know we both don't live in Lexington, but say we did. Right. I used to live in Lexington. So we both live in Lexington. We're both paying the same amount of taxes, right? We're both throwing into the same system. I send my sixth grader to one middle school and you send your sixth grader to the other school. We should feel confident that both of our kids are receiving the same quality education because we're in the same district. We're paying the same taxes. We have the same age child. Absolutely not will they receive the same education. That will depend on the school. It will depend on their individual teacher that year and how and what that teacher decides to use that year to teach your child.
How they march to the guidepost.
That's right. How they march to the guidepost. And I also learned, and the reason I really started to learn this was because when my stepson lived with us and he was going to middle school, his teacher, and she was actually the lead teacher that year for the grade, for sixth grade, she was having them read material that I felt like was not age appropriate and was also, I was very confused to what the educational value was of the material. And what really kind of got me was that he came home one day with a piece of paper, and the piece of paper says, if you do not want your child to read this book, sign this and send this back tomorrow. Well, I got a few problems with that. First problem is I can't research a book at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday and make a decision by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Maybe I want to read that book myself first, or maybe at least I'd like to go and read the Cliff Notes on it. Well, I'm supposed to do that at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday or something? That's my first problem. It was not enough notice. It was not enough time for the parent to make an educated decision.
Do you think that's intentional?
I do, actually.
Do you really?
I'm going to be honest, I do. Yeah. Second thing that I have a problem with, think about what I told you how that permission slip said. It was not permission to read the book. It was a waiver. I know you girls are a little different. You have a daughter. Girls are a lot more responsible. Got boys? Yeah, Amanda's like, yes. A sixth grade boy does not bring papers home for you to sign. Okay. Right. You have to go through their backpack physically once a week yourself. And you're like, this has been in here for 3 weeks. Why didn't you give me this? You cannot count on a sixth grade boy to bring you that. So there could have been a whole bunch of parents who did not want their child to read that book, but their kid never brought the form home because it was not a permission slip. It was an exemption slip. Big difference. So I did not let him read the book. And that left a lot of feathers. And so then I said, I'd like to know what book is next. And this whole thing started. And the teacher did not would to a lot of degree just ignore my emails. And so then I was going to the principal and I wasn't getting anywhere with him. And so then I contacted the community liaison for Fayette County Public Schools, and she was very helpful and helped walk me through this process. And she explained to me how this works, because I was like, who decides that this is an appropriate book for 6th graders? She said, well, during the summertime, teachers have to submit these kinds of things to their principal. The principal has to sign off for it. She said, now let's be honest. Principals aren't reading every single book over the summer. They're just not. She said, so most of the time what happens is they will go through that list, and there is a list of banned books that Fayette County Public Schools have. So they'll look through that list to make sure that none of those books are on the ban list. And if they're not, they'll sign off on it. And I was like, so basically there's not really much oversight on this.
So to your point, before we get too far down or squirrel off somewhere else, to your point, Common Core says there are certain guideposts that educators must meet in order to move students from point A to point B.
Right. The knowledge they should know at the end of the year.
Sure.
The base level, so that we all, I guess sort of the idea is that then every child will know the same things by the end of the year.
Correct. But the methodology to get to that
the vehicle to get to it
can vary
depending on the teacher.
Yep. And so, this concept of then the teacher can decide, well, I'm going to read whatever I want, as long as it's not on a banned book list, then there's a good chance that principal's not going to stop it.
That's right. And they did not care much for me bringing that to everyone's attention. And then I wanted to know exactly which Common Core standards that was meeting and what was the educational value of some of these books.
People don't like being
They don't
asked
like
questions.
that. They do not like that. And the other thing too is that then kind of the community liaison that year was wonderful. And she understood my position and respected my position, although I don't sure that it was exactly hers. And I appreciated that. That's exactly who Fayette County needed in that position. She kind of told me from, a mom standpoint and a parental standpoint, here's the best way to solve this problem. Go ahead and ask the teacher to give you what's going to happen next semester. That way you got plenty of time. You can look at it yourself. And I told her, I said, some of these things I might actually let him read if I could get a chance to read it first. But now I'm suspicious because you're wanting my kid to read The Blue Eye. I think that's what it was called. It's 6th grade. I looked it up. It's a college reading. It's got some very, very serious content to it for 6th graders, for these really young developing minds. So she said, ask them ahead of time. Ask them to provide it. Here's what I found. They don't know. They don't. I'm sure that there are some that do, but the two specific English teachers that I dealt with at a middle school and then in a high school, when I asked them, I would like to know which books that they would be doing the next month, they could not answer that question, which told me that they were not planned yet. Yeah. So that's my thing, is that not all teachers are the same. And that's the thing we have to understand. Yes, there's absolutely teachers that spend their entire summer and all of their off work time and all this time building their plan for the year. There's teachers you could definitely ask, what are your students going to be reading in November if you stay on track? And they'll go, they're going to do this, this, and this. But I was not dealing with teachers that could give me that list. And so then I was taking it back to the principal and wanting to know exactly why the lead teacher for his 6th grade team did not know what her students were going to be reading next month. And I can tell you that we're back to the whole, they do not like people questioning this. And there was several teachers over the years that told me that they thought that I would probably be a lot happier in private school or homeschooling. but my standards were a little bit different, of what I was looking for.
Yeah. That's wild, isn't it?
It is. And it's sort of this epiphany I was having is like, well, I guess in my mind, I thought it was all the same too, that like every 6th grade class in that school would be reading the same stuff, right? Like every class is going to be doing the same thing. The lead teacher maybe has come up with that or whatever. Absolutely not. It varied from class to class.
Yeah. So, I'm learning this as you're telling me, right? Because I didn't know any different for that. Yeah. All I remember is, at least in the elementary and into middle school, I don't think we really cared too much once we got to high school. And cared is probably the wrong word, but let's just go with it. I just remember, you know how it is when a child is moving from one grade to the other, and then you start to have the ability as a parent to influence who's my daughter or my son going to have in whatever grade next year. And so what we found interesting was all this big power play among the parents to say, well, I want to be in Susie Q's class or, Miss Johnson's class or Miss Delberta's class or whatever. And so we would field all these questions of, where are you putting your daughter?
Right.
It's like, where are you putting your kid?
Yeah.
Because I'm probably going to put her elsewhere, because our philosophy, I guess, at that point was everybody was trying to get all their kids trying to get into one particular class.
Right.
And I thought, I never explored it, I guess is where I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So we just said, let all the kids go to that class and let's put Rachel over here so that she can have, maybe a better opportunity to engage in learning, as opposed to fighting all the popular kids trying to get in one particular class. And so we took the approach to say, I'm not really sure where she's going to end up, and I'm not really going to fight. If everybody's fighting for this one particular class, then we're not.
Right.
So, good luck to you. But I never considered the idea or the concept that instructor can carve their own path. Absolutely. Through these requirements.
Absolutely. And, and now that I'm an adult and a parent, I've looked back on it because I loved school. I mean, I'm a lifelong learner too. I mean, I absolutely loved going to school, and, I had phenomenal teachers. I mean, I could sit here and still remember and name off for you a handful that were just like phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I could also name off double that were awful, that were terrible, that did nothing.
From your time?
From my time. That, I mean, literally taught us nothing. And I think, I want to bring something up you read on the page too from the Department of Education. It said something about...
that I just read? Yeah,
that you just read. There was something that you brought up that I thought was a very interesting.
So I said, some parents believe the Kentucky Constitution establishes the prerogatives of parents. If a parent chooses this option, they take complete responsibility.
Right there.
Yeah.
Stop right there. I think that's interesting because you know what? That infers that if you send your child to a government public school, it is not your responsibility. And I think that's interesting. I wonder how the teachers unions would feel about that, honestly, because, if you ever know teachers or friends with teachers, and especially good teachers, it's really tough on them to deal with this culture of people who feel like that's your problem, not mine. I send my kid to school. They're doing bad. It's your fault. It's your problem. It's not my problem. Oh, they're not getting their homework done, or, oh, they're not learning. It's all this deferment of responsibility. It's the school's fault. It's the teacher's fault. It's never the parent's fault. And I think that was kind of what helped guide me up to this point of being able to say, hey, we're going to homeschool, even though I never knew anybody that had, was that I never felt like that it was the government's responsibility to teach my kid. If any of my kids were struggling, my now 18-year-old son had ADHD. Had all kinds of obstacles in school. We had a plan for him at school and everything. And then he would do his MAP testing and they would go, wow, we've never seen a kid with ADHD like he has. And his MAP scores be so high in reading. I mean, usually, kids, they really struggle with reading when they have these, these learning disabilities. And I would say, I spend every night reading to my child. We go to the library once a week. We bring out more books than we can pack. Word cards, sight cards, numbers. I never expected the school to do all of that. And I never had to have them come to me and say, hey, your child's struggling. Why don't you try this at home? I was already doing it at home. I just did. I never saw it as the government's responsibility to take care of my child. I expected the government to have my child in a safe environment when they were with them. That was their responsibility, to keep them safe and take care of them during those hours. But I never expected it to be their full-hearted responsibility.
Yeah, that's kind of counter to some push that I'm seeing, like on X or Twitter, whatever you call it. I call it the tweeters, what I call it. Or maybe I'm seeing on Facebook, who knows. But that seems to be counter to what I'm seeing. There's seems to be now a push to say it is your job to teach them 8 to 4, 8 to 3, whatever.
Right.
School hours. It is your job. So don't send me homework.
Right.
So just because you can't get your job done for homework doesn't mean I'm going to waste my family time doing your work.
Yeah. Homework's a whole nother topic that I would love to speak on.
Yeah. All right, let's do it.
Homework is the most useless thing that the school does. And It's the easiest thing to talk about because here's the thing. There's never been a single study that has been done that has proven that homework is beneficial. And as a matter of fact, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of studies that have shown over and over and over again that homework is not. It is not useful. It does nothing to help the child. It is pointless and they should not do it. And there are a lot of schools and teachers who have gotten more on board with that. There has been, I feel like, more of a push, especially the last 10 to 15 years, to like, let's stop homework, because homework does nothing but take away other hours for that child that they should be engaged in other things. And if a child is struggling during that 8 to 4, 8 to 3, whatever it is they're doing, adding a bunch onto that at night is not going to make enough significant of a difference to the trauma that causes for that child and their family and the other important things that are a part of their learning process that it then takes away from.
So I know we're going to get into this big circle here, right? Let's dig into that just a little bit, right? Because again, I think the point of this episode is for people to say, hey, I'm considering this given all the circumstances of the world. Why does a school get itself into a position to issue all this homework? It seems like it's homework to do homework.
Right. I think that, again, it goes back to the variations on the teachers. And you see that, whenever you have a child in school, you see like, oh, this teacher gives homework every single night and this other one never gives homework. Again, it's up to the teacher, unless you have a school where a principal has made it very clear that they don't want homework or they want it to be at a minimum. And we did participate at a school here in Lexington that had that philosophy for a while, a public school. The principal was very well versed on the research and was very well aware that homework was not beneficial, especially when it comes to children who are neurodivergent. And she was very clear with her teachers that homework was not to be a primary thing. And that if you were going to assign homework, it should be no more than so many minutes based on what grade level they were at. Homework is ridiculous. To expect a child, especially a small child, to go and sit in a chair all day long. They're only getting up to go to the bathroom, go to lunch, maybe some recess, maybe switching a little bit of classes. But for the most part of the day, they're sitting all day long, being told, be quiet, stop moving, don't get up, sit still. And then to send them home after that and say, now go do that for 2 more hours. What adult does that? Yeah. Like, adults don't even do, like, that is not healthy. Those children should be home running, playing, getting dirty, going to music class, football practice, hanging out with the family, helping cook dinner, doing chores. There's learning in all of those things too.
This is probably the most loaded question, at least it just hit me as she said it. So we'll see where this takes us. But it seems like it wasn't too long ago that, again, back on the Twitter or the Facebooks with the S on it, that there is something coming out that school is just a big indoctrination for factory work and for conditioning the human mind to I guess factory work, right?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of friends that talk about that. That was what their original push was for the government schools, and that's why I was talking about looking back. It's either World War I or World War II. There was a big push for that, and it was sort of to kind of make everybody the same, right? To start to kind of cookie cutter people,
assembly line type stuff,
right? And then we get into like the moral aspect of, well, we're just trying to level the playing field. But let's be all honest, you're not leveling the playing field. You can send, like we've already talked about, you send the same kids to the same schools, and even if they are in the same class and are receiving the same quality education from the same teacher, it is still not going to level the playing field, because then those children have to go home, and the support that they get at home is going to have a huge outcome on them as a whole, and how they finish out their school life and then go into adulthood.
So I hear you, and
and not just financial support, just support in general.
Yeah. Right. I think you're talking about the overall health of the child, the bigger picture of the health of each individual child,
and the interest. Because, like I said, if you have, there's very few children that don't struggle with learning how to read. It's hard to learn how to read, right?
Sure.
Every now and again, you've got one that just bump up, but that's pretty rare. So, if you have two parents, again, same class, same school, they're receiving the same quality of education. The teacher's great, but you've got one kid going home, and the parent has this philosophy of that's the school's responsibility. But then you have another parent who's like, okay, let's sit down. I'm going to read to you. I'm going to go over these flashcards with you. I'm going to take an interest in looking at your grade. I'm going to have regular communication with your teacher to kind of see if maybe there's things I can be supplementing at home. Those children are not going to come out even the same. Even though we have leveled the playing field, those two children will not come out the same at the end of the school year because the support that they had at home. And I do think a lot of it is kind of that philosophy. And that's why I thought it was really interesting to me that that's in the government's the Department of Education's document, because it's so if you're homeschooling your kids, then it's fully your responsibility. But if you're sending them to school, it's not your responsibility. It's like, no, my children are my responsibility every day, all day long,
that's
regardless of where they are. Yeah. They are always my responsibility.
That's a great catch of the wording, right? Because the wording is veiled, I guess, at that point to say what it is. Yeah. Okay. So, we've made a good point here, and I know we could talk probably the rest of the night on some of that stuff, but because I think there's a human element too, right? To say, I was very involved with my daughter's education. My wife was too, and we sit down and we did all those things because we thought that was the best way for her forward. There's equally some families that won't spend, a minute with their child, right? And so, I don't know if it's a level playing field or not. I think it provides an opportunity, but certainly one student in that example is going to shine over the other student. Right. I don't know where I'm going with that statement other than to say, then let's move into the next piece, which is then why choose homeschooling? So, I explained to you like why we chose it for our boys at least. And now my daughter's homeschooled, but, people have chosen homeschooling for a lot of different reasons, and the pandemic has changed that a lot. There's a lot more reasons now that people homeschool. So before, my opinion is that primarily there was religious reasons, and then there was also sort of really freedom-driven reasons. Like growing up, people the hippies homeschool their kids, or the really conservative Christians, and kind of what I understood of that unfair talk was that, okay, so your hippie crew, quotations, right, during that time is that these are freedom loving people. These are people who buck authority. These are people who want to go against the grain. Like that's just who they are, like they're, they're preppers, they're this, they're that, whatever. So, people sort of mostly fell in one of those kinds of categories. And then what happened with the pandemic was that you had this huge influx. Well, for starters, people didn't really have much of a choice. And it was like, okay, well, we're going to shut down the schools, but we're going to do online schooling. And that was such a mess. And then I think there was a lot of parents who started realizing, well, like, wait a minute, if I'm going to have to do this, then I should just do it the way I want to do it. Oh, wait a minute, I can do it that way. I know people who do this. What do they call that? Non-traditional?
Non-traditional, right. And I also think, too, that because so many people were home, it wasn't just the kids home, parents were home, too. They were being sent home, can't come to work, got to work remotely. They were getting to see parts of the education that they had never seen before. So I think there was a lot of eye-opening that was going on in the community. Like, wait a minute, well, what is my child being taught? You mean
like the geometry question of...
The geometry question of hunting, yes.
What was the answer to that, by the way?
Let's see. How did they, it's like one of those questions they put when you vote, like, how they switch it around because they're trying to get you to answer. So the question was... what was the question? Is it morally okay to hunt animals for any reason other than hunting? And to hunt animals for any other reason other than food? The answer is yes, it is. It's my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I know some people are not okay with hunting for sport, but in my opinion, yes. The answer is yes. You can hunt for sport as long as it is not an animal on the prohibited list.
What was during the right time geometry class's answer to that?
Well, and that was the thing, is that the teacher was giving the students, like at the end of these kinds of questionnaires, how the class rated. Like what did the class as a whole? Yeah. And I remember my son telling me that it was only him and one other person who answered yes. But then I had to wonder if they were confused by the question. So did they answer the way they really felt, or did they answer because they were confused by the wording in the question?
Yeah.
Because the question was made to make you answer almost the way I think that whoever designed it wanted you to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Johnny wants to hunt with an AR-15.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Is it morally okay to use an AR-15
It's
to
for
hunt?
food. Yeah.
If it's for food.
If it's for food. Yeah. Yeah. And I just, those things.
An assault rifle,
do
15.
not feel like are questions to be discussed at school. Now, when we're talking about upper level, we're talking about more even college courses, right? Yes. Then we would get think about when we were in college, like you get in this discourse, like, okay, let's all discuss this. But we're talking about adults then. Yeah, not in geometry for sure. But we're talking about adults then. We're talking about trying to generate adult thinking where you can look at other options and see other people's perspective and maybe try to expand. But when we're talking about young ones now, that doesn't work for my household.
I'm not making fun of it at all, but I'm just like, if the deer runs at an obtuse angle of 47 degrees away from an AR-15 firing at 1,200 feet per second,
right? Is
it okay to shoot him if it's not for food?
Yeah, if it's not for food.
Yeah. I was trying to put geometry into the question.
One thing. So you were asking like, why do it? I think one thing too is like the biggest thing is like it. A lot of things is the curriculum choice. And I think that when the pandemic happened, a lot of families realized like, okay, so wait a minute, especially if you're living in Kentucky. Okay, so I can homeschool my kid. I have to teach these subjects, but that's all it tells me. So then I can teach those subjects for the most part, however I want to. I think that it really opened people's eyes to like, well, wait a minute. I can choose how my children learn things and what they are learning. And, what does that look like long term for them? And I'm going to give you like a basic example here. And again, this also goes back to the responsibility factor. Mm-hmm. All of my children can write in cursive. They did not learn that at public school. So
is that taught at public school?
It
anymore?
Is not.
I didn't think it was.
So they quit doing that a long time ago, at least in Lexington. So when my 18-year-old, he was like 4th, 5th grade, and I just all of a sudden realized like, hey, I don't think he knows how to write in cursive. So I asked the teacher, and the teacher said, yeah, we don't teach that anymore. They haven't done that in years. I'm like, oh. And she was like, so, like for me at the end of the year, sometimes we have this, which is a whole nother discussion we can talk about. But at the end of the year, we have like 2 weeks where we don't really do anything. Like if we finish our maps testing early or this, that, and the other, we just watch movies. So I'll give them sometimes some cursive sheets, worksheets for them to work on just so that they're kind of like experimenting with it. But I realized they're not teaching it. So then I started getting books. So during the summertime, I would have my son and my stepson do cursive books, like, literally these little like $3, $5 workbooks that you can get online. And back then I was having to get them at Walmart, but, they would just learn cursive. And so all of my children know cursive, but that is not something that the older two were taught in public school because at least here, they're not teaching that anymore. Well, you know what? I disagree with that. I personally think that cursive is important to learn for a variety of reasons. One of the biggest reasons I think that cursive is important is because it actually develops your writing skill much better. And there is research to back that up. And if you notice that a lot of times when people learn cursive, their penmanship becomes a lot better. Well, the kids nowadays have just absolutely awful penmanship. And especially when we're talking about boys, which I have a bunch of boys, you start teaching them cursive and then you suddenly realize all of a sudden their penmanship is good. So, it develops a lot more of those fine motor skills in your hands. Mm-hmm. So, there's just one very small, tiny example of like, hey, when I homeschool, I can teach my children cursive. That goes right into their writing requirement. Otherwise, if they'd gone to this school, they would never learn that. So I think I was just choosing a really small example for you, right?
Yeah.
A very, safe example. So there's an example. I can choose that for my child and I have control over that.
Yeah. So we're just, if you can't write it, you can't read it.
That's right.
Yeah. So do you think that's a push from government to?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. I think it's ridiculous. I don't know who decided that. And I was floored when I realized that. And my entire family was floored. It was funny because I would have never thought that my family, as like my extended family, my parents, my grandparents, I would have never thought they would have supported me public or homeschooling. I mean, like I said, growing up, I heard them sometimes talk about this concept. They sort of made fun of it. They had bad opinions of it. By the time we got to Houston and I said, I'm going to do this homeschooling thing, they were all like, I am so glad you're doing it. Like they were so in support of it. because I was close to all of them and had shared all of these things that I had went through while I was with, my stepson and then my 18-year-old while they were in public school. Like, I was sharing, like, do you know they don't learn cursive anymore? Do you know that I'm having to go and argue over this book that is for college level that is completely inappropriate for a sixth grade? By the time it got to Houston, the family was just very supportive of that because it's like, what's happened here? Like, why are we losing things like cursive? Who decided that? Like, I don't even know who decided that and why. Like, what was the basis for that? Like, back to the homework. Who decided homework? And why? What was the basis for that,
Is that the spirit of the question, Amanda?
Well, I've just always thought that it was a government thing because, like, the old original documents were written in cursive and script. So
good point. If you can't read it or can't write it, you can't read it.
Yeah. You're definitely limiting that person's ability to learn things from antiquity, and some of those things being extremely important, like the Constitution, and other things. It's very limiting it, and even from a practical standpoint, if I find something in my grandparents' artifacts that are from my great grandmother that she wrote in a book, I would like to be able to read it. To me, it's creating ignorance to take it's a part of the English language. So why would you remove it? And I'll tell you something else that's ridiculous to me is that I don't know of any children that take keyboarding class in government schools. My children didn't. I've asked other parents who have kids in public school. I'm very curious about this. When I was in sixth grade here in public school in Lexington, we took keyboarding in sixth grade. Well, we keyboard more now than we ever have in the history of time. So why is keyboarding not being taught? So my children also do keyboarding. My children have learned how to type. Now my older kids, obviously not my 6-year-old yet, but I've made my boys learn how to type because hello. I don't understand why that's not to me, cursive, writing in print, keyboarding in this day and age, there's your, your guidepost right there for your writing.
Yeah. In today's world, keyboarding
absolutely.
is everything.
How can you not? And my boys really bucked it at first. They were like, why are you making us do this? Other parents don't make their kids do this. And I'm like, whatever, just do it. And now they're grateful. Even my 13-year-old said something to me, just a few months ago. He was like, yeah, ever since I learned that, now I can type really fast. I'm like, yeah, I know.
So another rabbit hole question. So all the flashing signs, warnings of a potentially offensive question coming.
Okay.
Right.
It's okay. I'm good at holding my boundaries.
Yeah.
I come to a whole segment on boundaries.
So this is interesting. I've never considered this. If you can't write it, you can't read it, as potentially a degradation of human skills for the long-term effect of, in my own words, dumbing down our students, our kids, which in turn dumbs down the future, which brings us, the rabbit hole is to some other form of control that will happen, somewhere down the road.
It could potentially happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, and it sounds like a way out there type of theory. Is that what we're talking about, or? I
don't know. It could very well be. I live in a world nowadays where I don't try to worry about those things, because of my own personal health and living my best life in the here and now.
YOLO.
Yeah. But, from a practical standpoint, let's just think about it right now. If I decided to take out a piece of paper and write in cursive to Amanda and say something about you that I didn't want you to know, and you didn't read cursive, well, then there you go. You just got left out, David.
Yeah.
So, from a very practical standpoint, it's kind of like writing in code that everyone may not know. And I'm not really sure why it's not a standard. And again, just go back to the basics of it. It creates better penmanship. I'm appalled at adult penmanship sometimes. And that does not make, my dad, very successful, very intelligent person, does not have great penmanship. So do not get me wrong. You don't have to have great penmanship to be successful. We all know that.
Right.
But let's just be honest. Like, it's something that should be developed during a child's education. And it is done much easier through cursive than print. Now, you need to learn both, but it develops these, the fine motor skills in the hand.
Have you ever gotten an answer to that? If there's a...
I didn't press that question. It's just that once I realized, I was like, well, I guess I'll have to teach them this at home.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that was sort of the beginning phases, and it would be years later when we just made this decision. But there was a lot of things sort of laying down stepping stones for me to kind of guiding my own self to realizing like, we just need to homeschool, because if I'm going to have to do a lot of these other things already, then why not just go ahead and do it all?
Yeah. We'll come back to that, I think, here in a second. But I wrote the word 44 on my paper in cursive. So to your point of penmanship, and a lot of the stuff is new, right? I've never considered really anything that we're talking about here tonight. So, and I have pretty decent penmanship when I take the time to write.
Yeah.
44 was always my favorite thing to write in cursive, because I always like these big loopy F's.
Yeah.
You know, and I could do my own thing with the F's,
Yeah.
and I could make it whatever else. And I guess that carried over. And then my previous career, was law enforcement. And so this is pre-computers and pre-keyboarding, whatever else. And so every report was handwritten, and I always took the time to write neatly. And you know what? It kind of runs in my family a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe my dad, not so much, but my brother has a very interesting script to the way he writes, you know, and I think I developed my own as well. And I just kind of thought that it was my calling card. It was my reputation. And so the quality and the quantity of my reports and what those reports not only had in content, but their legibility, I guess would be the word. I was trying to think, is that a real word or not?
It's okay. We can make up words.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Maybe my public school education coming out here.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah. The legibility of my reports, because, and I guess I was blessed with hearing somebody tell me that, hey, you know, your reports are way out in front of you. People are going to make their judgments on you.
Yeah. A judge might have read one, right?
They did.
Yeah, all the time.
They did.
Yeah.
So before I actually showed up in court, you know, my stuff was read.
Yeah.
And I always took the approach to say, then I want people to be able to read my stuff, right?
Right.
And so I guess I haven't made those connections to say, you know, was it part of learning to write in cursive?
Well, it's a hallmark to learning when you look at education from the big picture of thousands and thousands of years. You know, it's a privilege and a luxury to even be able to write it all. 200 years ago, I don't know what kind of stock you all came from, but I can tell you right now, the kind of stock I came from, I wouldn't have been afforded an education 200 years ago. You know, I mean,
no, we would have been
200 years ago, that was still reserved for the elite.
Yeah, we would have been in the lowest caste.
Yep. So,
and we talk about, you know, the coal mining camps that my parents were from. Both sets of parents were from that. And if it weren't for my dad making a decision to join the military and to leave, then there's a good chance we'd still be in McDowell County today, living in a, you know, side of a hill somewhere. Nothing wrong with any of that. I'm not,
right, of course,
you know, saying that about anyone that lives there. I'm just saying they made a decision, and you know, you look back at things and you say, man, I feel pretty fortunate, right? That, you know, Dad made a decision not to do certain things.
And, to increase your opportunities.
Yeah, to increase my opportunities. And those words now really speak to me a lot more, you know, certain things that he said to me over time. Yeah. I didn't give two shits
Didn't pay attention
really.
Then,
yeah. That's just Dad talking. Yeah. But you get to that older, wiser part and you're like, oh,
that's what they meant.
Yeah, he's right. He's exactly right. Why didn't I listen to that?
Yeah.
All right. So without hijacking too far and going off too far from our topics, I think we're getting some good stuff. So let's go back to this basic question. How is homeschooling different than a private school?
So private school is sort of like taking a quarter and flipping it. And on one side, you've got the heads as your government funded schools. And then on the other side, you have your private schools. So there's still other people making the most important decisions for your family, for your child. So do you want to subscribe to either of those, right?
There's still an administration.
There is. And there's still someone making those same calls, those same decisions for your child.
So it's a decision.
And we've done both. Yeah. And we have done every kind of school there is imaginable. We have done public school, private school, the cottage school, which is like a homeschool hybrid, and we have done full-fledged homeschooling. We've done co-ops. I mean, we've about done the gamut. And you know, private school, when you and I talked on the phone, I kind of explained for my family, at least, some of our experiences with the private schools, they were not as bad as the government funded schools, but close. It's almost like the pendulum swings both ways. And a lot of times it'll go extreme in one direction and then it swings extreme in the other direction. And a lot of times private schools is the same kind of deal. If you start to question things, they do not like that. They do not like you questioning those things. So, and this is, I feel bad kind of talking about this because I feel like it's very general, broad stroking terms. I don't think that's fair to anyone. Like, that's not fair to the public schools. It's not fair to the teachers. It's not fair to the private schools because obviously every experience is going to be different. Every year is going to be different. Every teacher is going to be different.
That's a great disclaimer, by the way. Nothing we've talked about is to blast.
It's not broad stroking.
That's exactly right.
No. But so when at least here in Central Kentucky, when you talk about a private school, you are pretty much talking about a Christian school because there is not much opportunity of a private school that is not a Christian school. So the two that come right off the bat that I can think of in Lexington that are not Christian affiliated or affiliated with religion is Sayre and the Lexington School.
Right.
We're talking huge money to go there. And
why
both very phenomenal schools from what I understand.
That's correct.
And I think the Lexington School has been around a very long time. Like very old school.
A long time. But why is that? Why do you say that? Why do you say, and experience could be one thing, personal, I don't know. Why is that the case? Why is it that private schools are either Christian or these super high dollar academies?
I think because for us here locally, here in Central Kentucky, that we're still situated pretty well in the Bible Belt. So I think just in antiquity being the last, say maybe 2-3 decades, maybe not even that long, private schools came about as an alternative option to the public schools. From the position of families that wanted a more conservative education for their children that was involving religion because there has been such a push with the government schools for decades now to eradicate that because it was there originally. When government funded schools first became a thing, religion was a part of it to an extent. And, that kind of got chipped away over time, which makes complete sense to me because, you can't if you're going to make a school open to everyone, you can't expect everyone to come in with the same religious beliefs. Of course you can't. That's not fair. That takes away that leveling, that playing field, So I feel like that here in Central Kentucky, we have a lot of those because we are in the Bible Belt. There's a lot of people here who are grown up, in Christian families. And they wanted that choice of like, I want my children to learn about religion. I want my children to learn about the Bible. I want them to learn about God. And so, but then you don't have to homeschool, right? So you can send them there and you don't have to homeschool.
So then you've proven your point that the whole concept of moving out of public schools isn't a 2 or 3 year old thing. It's not since the pandemic. It's been around for years and
forever.
years and years.
Yeah.
It just took the form of either a high dollar academy, high dollar school, private school, or the Christian element of our communities have decided, for whatever they decided, maybe you can expand on it. The Christian element of our communities have said, you know what, we're tired of this crap that's going on in the public schools, and public schools have removed God or the 10 Commandments or whatever they want to say. And so we're going to form our own thing. Right. And create these Christian schools. Is that
I feel like, yes, that's my opinion. But yes, I feel like there's a difference in morals, values, belief systems. We're clashing. And so, in a free country, that's exactly what should happen. In a free society like we have, if you want your child to grow up learning formally about your religion, then you should absolutely have that option. Got to pay for it, but nothing's free.
But even in
homeschooling's not free either. We can get into that in a little
well, let's get there. Let's transition over to that. So, even in a Christian school format, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? I guess the Christian schools, and I'm lumping those completely into one category.
Very general,
very general. The Christian schools then have gotten together and said, "Hey, we want to do something different than what the public schools are doing."
Right.
But even then, there's a level of control.
Absolutely.
There's a decision maker. There's a decision making process, which it seems would mirror the exact issue that we're talking about with public schools.
It is, and both can be equally as extreme. And that is my personal experience. Is that it's almost like going from one extreme to the other. And I don't do well with the extreme. I don't feel like that is good environment for raising children in. I'm open-minded. I am constantly growing as a human being. It's so important to me to never stay the same person. I want to be better and different every year of my life. And so we can't do that if we're always looking through the same lens. We cannot do that. And I don't do well with the extremes, and especially when it's being taught to my children. Mm-hmm. Children, in my opinion, should have the opportunity to develop ideas and things on their own. And one thing that I do disagree, I think a lot of times with this kind of Christian element to a lot of the private schools, is that there's a lot of the free will that is removed in that case. And, you know, I grew up Christian too. The Lord is all about free will. That's what we were given. So children should be allowed to develop that free will on their own. And I feel like a lot of times when we're taught a certain way, it takes that away. It takes the free will away. I also don't do well with the rigidness from the public school or the private Christian schools of like, this is the way and this is the only way. And anything outside of that is wrong. Either you're a bad person, you're immoral, you're not inclusive, you're going to hell, you're a bigot, you're a this, you're a that. I don't need my children to be told that. They're children. They're none of those things. And you know what? Even if they have confusing ideas, they're still children. They're not those people. They will become adults. And when they're adults, then society can want to put labels on them if they want to. But the whole point of education is to grow the mind to where it's capable of seeing all these ideas. And, you know, I've changed my mind on tons of things.
Sure.
You know, there's plenty of things that over the course of my adulthood that I have become more open to that I would have never thought, because for me, I feel like you should constantly be trying to learn and grow. And if you put yourself in a box, you say, this is the way, this is the only way, that's ignorance. That's not education.
So good point. My words, not yours. Okay. I'll make sure that I'm kind of going to paraphrase here, but I want to make sure that I'm not pigeonholing you into what you just said. So
don't put me on the ringer, David.
Yeah, here we go. That's a good setup for here we go.
Yeah.
So
don't need any more haters.
Yeah. So homeschooling really fits into the fact of, hey, we've got a public school curriculum, and I may or may not agree with what's going on there, and I don't like these guideposts and the variables of the teachers that can get to the guideposts of Common Core, or whatever else. It seems like just a short time ago, the only other option was a private school, and the private schools we've talked about being the religious piece that we've been spending the last few minutes with. But even with that, you're getting someone else's decision on what your child is going to be taught, and you may or may not agree with it.
Right. You're getting their opinion.
You're getting their opinion of what
their morals, their values, their beliefs.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And so where homeschooling really fits then is it kind of bridges that gap and allows whoever's doing the homeschooling to, I guess, put in their own values and morals for what they want their child to learn.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think especially when we talk about the big issues, which we probably don't need to travel down those roads, but when we get about the big issues, and we know what those issues are.
Right.
When we get into those big issues, then yes, me personally, my opinion, my experience, and the experience of my husband in our family, our little unit, I do not want to do that to my children. I do not want those extremes to be a part of their life. And it seems very black and white in some of the big issues when it comes to sex, homosexuality, science in some regards, hell, how we treat people, how we view mistakes, what's allowed and what's not allowed, how we view the past. A lot of big issues like that. And people are really starting to look at that, which I actually think is a good thing overall. My generation, your generation, all the gaps in between us, I think that people are starting to look at that for the first time in a long time.
Feels like it.
It does, because they're like, wait a minute. So there's certain people that believe this, but now wait a minute. Do they have control over teaching my child that? And that goes for both. Like, again, this is going for our public schools. It's going for our Christian schools. So then the nice thing is the freedom to be like, wait a minute. Do I have to do either of these? I don't.
Is the pushback to you, though, as a homeschool instructor, right? Mm-hmm. Is the pushback then to you that is your opportunity to teach the lessons that you want? Because they're going to get exposed to a whole bunch of God knows what when they get to a public school, right? Mm-hmm. And then your teaching opportunity is then when they come home, you can shape and guide them the way that you want. Is that the pushback that you receive as a homeschool person?
I do think that there is a lot of people who have the opinion that, homeschoolers pick and choose what their kids learn, and that's a bad thing.
Therefore, sheltering them to the rest of what the world is offering.
But here's the thing. The public schools also pick and choose what the kids learn. So do the private schools. So what's your point?
Yeah.
So then the kind of insinuation is that, a parent's not smart enough to make that decision. And I disagree with that. And not all parents are the same level of intelligence, obviously. But that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily provide that opportunity for your child. I mean, just because you may not have, a master's degree in education doesn't mean that you're not fully capable of facilitating an education for your child. And I think that it is very disgusting for people to feel like that parents are incapable of doing that. And especially in modern day, and especially since the pandemic, because I'll tell you one thing that's nice for homeschoolers. The pandemic busted wide open opportunities that were not there before. Before, there was more limited curriculum, very expensive limited curriculum. There was just not a lot of options. Now the curriculum is just unbelievable. The opportunities now for homeschool kids is unbelievable. Everybody was at home. Everybody went to the internet. Homeschooling has become such a big thing. Everybody's jumped in like, hey, wait a minute. I can make a buck at this. I can do this. There is some amazing things. There's a girl in my group right now. She is designing lesson plans. She started her own little group. I've been letting her advertise in my group. She is just designing lesson plans and putting them on the internet for free. And they're amazing. She's doing it based on farm animals, on agriculture and stuff like that, because that's what her family does for a living. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I mean, it's like those kinds of things weren't there 5 years ago. They're wide open now.
So I had another rabbit hole to go down, but let's skip that and let's get into then how do you standardize that, right? So if one of the issues with public schools or government schools is that you're concerned about the curriculum is being presented, then how do you vet, or how do you ensure? And let me not look at you two in the room here. Let me say, if someone's listening to this and they're saying, man, I've been considering this for a while, and I think maybe we should do that. How do you vet a homeschool curriculum? How do you know what's being taught there?
So my personal opinion is it literally is by trial and error. And, and people shouldn't let that scare them, because that happens all the time in public school. So if we're going to set public school as kind of like our standard,
sure,
right? which most people do.
Yeah,
they think, that's the standard. And I hear that a lot from new homeschoolers. They go, I'm just afraid that, they're not going to get taught the same education. I'm afraid if I pull them out of school that it's, they're going to end up not as smart, or they're not going to know what their peers know. And I can understand why that's very scary for people. But just because you leave them there doesn't mean that's going to happen either. I know two people right now, two 18-year-olds. I'm not going to say who they are, but I'm just going to leave it at that. Two 18-year-olds I know personally right now, both graduated from public school here in Kentucky, and neither of them can barely read or write. They graduated. So there's the question. How did they graduate almost completely incapable of reading and writing? How did they get that far? How did they get all the way to a diploma? Where does Kentucky rank in public education? Pretty low. We're going to look. Amanda's going to look it up. She's on it, isn't she? It's been a long time since I looked, but it's usually very low. So I'm going to guess it's still sitting there. Yeah. I'm going to guess like 48. It's pretty low. So that's the thing is, it's like, we shouldn't really get too high. 46th. 46th. Yeah. No, wait a minute. Hold on. Is that rank for? No, that's bachelor degrees. Hold on. No, that's not it. Yeah, that one's probably going to take her a minute.
44th is that one. So 44th in education. Yeah, that's staggering. And I mean,
and it's always been sort of an issue for Kentucky. That's why I knew it would still be probably pretty bad. So, the question is like, well, can I teach my child? Am I going to be able to provide the same thing as the public school? And the answer is no. You're not going to be able to provide the same thing that the public school can. But in actuality, you are likely to be able to provide more because you're going to be able to provide more options and more experiences that your child is not going to have. And that can be done in a variety of ways, through curriculum, through books, through experiences. I mean, I can tell you right now that my kids get hands-on experience, field trip experiences that they would never get in public or private school. And I know that field trips is my big thing that I plan. And I was going to say that, like, the adults enjoy my field trips just as much, if not more, than the children do, because oftentimes we are learning and experiencing things that we have never done before. So those kinds of experiences carry a lot of weight that I think that people don't realize. Of just sort of, for me, the idea in education is that we want a broad thing. We don't need to pigeonhole ourselves into like, okay, we're just going to learn these things. But what creates an intelligent person is a person who has learned a broad variety of things, because then you are able to make decisions. You are able to,
informed.
You're informed. You know how to learn. You can dissect information. You can have a very open mind instead of a closed mind. And when we really take it down to these very small categories, then we get pigeonholed in and you have a very narrow mind. And luckily, Kentucky is very lenient, because Kentucky says these are the subjects that must be taught, period, the end. There you go. You hit those subjects. So, people go, like, how do you know that you're doing the right thing? Well, okay, let's take one. History. I mean, that's a pretty broad subject, isn't it? History. Yeah. So you can go to the Common Core standards, which I would like to say, I personally don't really have anything I don't really have that big of an issue with the Common Core standards. Matter of fact, I look at them all the time. I don't look at them and print them off like, oh, I've got to do all this and put myself on the ringer like that. But I do like to gaze over them, because don't get me wrong, the federal government has spent a ton of money coming up with that plan. It can't be all bad, right? It is a nice, at least, place to kind of look at and see, well, what are they doing? I want to see what everybody's doing. I want to kind of, again, make an informed decision. We can look at that, but like, I can decide what my children learn for history. I mean, we can learn all kinds of things. When I first pulled my now 18-year-old out, I told you when we had the whole geometry social thing going on. It was really close to the end of the year. And so I was like, what are we going to do? And I decided, we only had like a couple months left of school. And I decided for history, I was going to have him read Machiavelli. And it was funny because I ended up having a conversation with, I won't say exactly who, but with someone from Fayette County Board of Education. And she said something, and I said, well, I had him read Machiavelli, and I had him write, a little basically synopsis for me for every chapter. She was like, okay, think you're doing your part. And I'm like, am I? I absolutely am. Because I looked at her, I said, have you ever read Machiavelli? She said, no. And I said, neither have I. I said, as a matter of fact, I'd never even heard of him until recently. And now I'm so glad that I had my son read this. There is all these things that we can learn from people who lived before us. When we look, like, history is a great example. We can learn so much from all these different people throughout the course of history that we don't have to be pigeonholed in to just one time frame each school year, one time frame. I love the flexibility of homeschooling. And especially now, we have like the recognitions of certain months. Like, for example, November is Indigenous Peoples Month. It's a great time to learn about Indigenous people of North America. So there you go. That's what we're going to do for history this month. That's what my family's doing for History Month. We have African American History Month. There you go. We're going to learn about African Americans this month. We have all these different things. We have months where we are going to recognize women in history. I mean, so, you don't have to get pigeonholed into like, okay, U.S. history, we've got to cover years 1800 to 1845 this year. My kids are all over the place. We do a thing called a book of centuries. So it's a big book that they have, and they jot down. It's like a timeline, and it helps the children to understand how things progress through history over the centuries. And so we'll jot those things down as we learn these different people, because it helps their minds to kind of see, like, what did that look like, in a continuum. Mm-hmm. of man's evolution. But do you understand what I'm saying is that why am I going to spend so much time on that? Who cares? I mean, like, really, as long as they're learning valuable lessons from all of those things, then who really cares exactly which part of history it is? And I'm glad the government's not dictating that for us here in Kentucky, because
are they
that's not
dictating?
necessary. No.
So does the homeschool curriculum have to marry up to the Common Core stuff?
No, absolutely not.
So it's just dictated by the
Subjects.
So Kentucky says you have to teach these subjects.
Yeah. And civics is one of them. And this is something interesting about what Kentucky dictates. Kentucky dictates that certain subjects have to be taught every school year. It does not differentiate between grade levels. So it's literally like, these are the subjects that must be covered, period, the end. And I get a lot of questions about this. New homeschool families will go, it's always the same question. I'm doing kindergarten. I'm doing first grade. How do I teach my child civics? Because the law says I must do that. How do I do that? I have to teach my kids science. Okay, so if your child goes to Fayette County Public Schools, they do not have civics or science, okay, when they're in elementary school. And when my kids were in elementary school here, and my one son in public school, they really didn't start doing much with science or history until about the 4th grade, where it was becoming more of like a separate class. Up until then, they were just sort of throwing pieces in, kind of dabbling in it, right? It did not become a defined separate class until you get in the upper elementary school. So I have to explain that to parents sometimes, like, okay, well, if we're going to sort of look at public school, because I always say they can't hold us to what they don't hold their own selves to.
Right.
So don't expect a kindergartner to have a full-blown civics class when public school is not doing that. You cannot hold us to a different standard.
You almost have to define what us who don't know your knowledge, you almost have to what am I trying to say? You almost have to show them the forest and the trees.
You have to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
And you have to break through that. And, you see parents do that. They're like, they'll start out really scared, and then they're like trying to figure it out. I don't fucking know. And then like you'll see them a year later, and they're like, they finally broke out of it. They broke out of what they thought it had to look like. Yeah. And it's because they were raised, again, like we talked about in the beginning, like they were raised and they're like, this is the way it has to be. But I would like to mention this just for the record. I do tell parents all the time that in my personal opinion, civics is one of the most important subjects that you can teach your children, and you can absolutely start teaching them civics in kindergarten. Yeah. The Tuttle Twins is my favorite curriculum for that. And they actually make books for preschoolers. And so parents get a lot of frustration over civics because, what's funny is that a lot of parents don't know what civics is. And you know what that tells me? They weren't taught that in public school either, because they're public school educated. They're like, I don't even know what civics is. Was I taught this? And I'm like, yeah, you probably were taught a little bit. So I always tell them though this, and they're like, I don't know I don't want to do it. And I'm like, no, yes, you do. This is part of why you homeschool. So you absolutely need to invest in civics. And it's my response every time is go to the Tuttle Twins. The Tuttle Twins will take care of you. You'll become a libertarian even if you didn't know you were. If you teach your kids the Tuttle. And literally
that's a whole other show.
Yeah. And when I went through the Tuttle Twins curriculum with my kids, I learned so much myself and was teaching my husband. Like he would come home from work and be like, okay, what did the Tuttle Twins teach us this week? Because I'm like, did you know? And, so that tells me, because like I told you, I've been a lifelong learner. I remember a lot of what I've learned, Right. That tells me nobody ever taught me that. I mean, we're talking about foundational issues here. So I do think that, civics, I'm glad that Kentucky requires it because it's making parents do it, and we need to be teaching our kids civics.
So let's move into, I guess, a little bit of you personally as far as homeschooling goes.
Okay.
So you've mentioned a couple times your group. Let's talk a little bit about, so if someone listening says, I'm interested and my curiosity is piqued here and we've been considering this for a little while, maybe it's time to take the leap. Let's start with how many kids do you homeschool? What are you responsible for homeschooling?
Okay. So I homeschool now 2 kids because my 18-year-old graduated in May.
Okay.
So I've got 2 right now that are home and still in school age, and I'm homeschooling. And now you said, what does that entail? Let's be a little more specific.
Yeah, I guess I want to lay out what your day looks like for homeschooling.
Every day is different. No.
Yeah.
No, we do have a schedule, but you know what? That's the thing is that, and it's funny because you and I were kind of talking in the beginning, like that maybe you and I are not exactly real flexible type of people. I am very flexible when it comes to homeschooling, but that is a gift that I have learned and accepted in order to be able to be a successful homeschool parent.
So how do you get somebody that's considering
You cannot come in with the rigidity of the public school. You have to understand that you are developing a new relationship with your children that was not there before, because before you were just mommy, and now you're mommy and your teacher. And those are two completely different roles oftentimes. It's a balance between, I want to give my child space and I want to treat them like I do in every other aspect, that I want to be gentle with them and kind with them and patient. But then I also need to create a level of accountability and sternness in the fact that this is school and we need to work on these things. We need to get through some of this material. And, you see that a lot. The homeschool groups are funny because you get together, the kids are wild. I mean, and it's always funny. We get a chuckle out of it, especially kids that have never went to any kind of sit down school, because these are kids who have never been told to sit down. You cannot line them up because they don't know what a line is. And I personally love that because I hate lines. I cannot stand standing in line.
Meaning in a government school,
that's right.
You make a line to go to lunch. You make a line to go to recess. They've never been
told to get in line, sit down, shut up. They don't know this. So they're very, and they've been in this environment where they've been encouraged to touch and learn and explore, their surroundings, their environment, everything they're doing. So they have a tendency to being a little bit like wild and running around. But it's funny when we go on our field trips, I get a lot of feedback from the places that host our field trips, whoever's, hosting the venue or whatever. And they always say, oh, the homeschool kids are our favorite because they always have the best questions. And I'm like, yeah, I bet they do. Because they're being taught to think a different way. They're being encouraged to ask a lot of questions instead of put your hand down. No, we'll get to you in a minute, And in all fairness to schools in general, whether it be public or private, you can't let kids talk you've got 30 kids in a classroom. You can't have kids just raising their hand. You'll never get through your hour.
Right.
But when you take your family and you're homeschooling, 1, 2, handful of kids, whatever, it lends for that. It lends for the opportunity to ask questions. And, in a lot of ways, we, like what you and I are doing here right now today, we learn by asking questions and then giving each other answers. So it lends well to that in the homeschooling environment because you're getting your child's getting that more individualized attention and is being encouraged to ask questions as opposed to being told to be quiet.
So you're responsible for 2 kids at the moment. Mm-hmm. One's graduated. So you have your 2 middle kids, but you've talked a lot about these groups that you have. And then I know just from being a friend of yours that your field trips are, I'd call it a signature, a calling card almost.
It is, and that was not a plan. That happened on accident.
Yeah. But those are not just 2 kids. I mean, you have 40, 50 kids or something?
In our group, no. So the group has, right now, I think we're sitting at about 4,600 families.
4,600?
Yeah. 4,600 families.
Yeah, let's spell that out. 4,600
families. And one thing is, and I just want to make sure.
And how big is that group?
And clear this up. So my group is for Kentucky families, and I am very careful about screening families who get in. Now, that's not to say there isn't some people who sneak in, but I only allow families. I do go out of my way, and I'm the only admin, so I'm going to give myself a little credit for that because it's sometimes an overwhelming task. I don't let people just join because they've sent a request. Unfortunately, most men I do not let in. And that's just kind of for, I feel like, some obvious reasons. It's not that men are not welcome to my group, but I always want to make sure that they actually have a family, that they have children. I want to know that they do live in Kentucky. There's a lot of people that have thousands probably at this point who have requested to join my group because they're considering moving to Kentucky and they would like to know what our homeschool community looks like. I don't let them in my group. And I hate that. There's other groups for that they can do that in, but I have been very specific on keeping my group to a certain, for a certain thing. And we're not going to learn from people going, well, we live in California and we're thinking about moving to Kentucky, but we want to know what it's like there. This is not the group for that. Okay. So I do really work hard to make sure that it is a family that lives in Kentucky. They do not have to be homeschooling. They have to either be homeschooling or considering homeschooling. So families who are not homeschooling yet are welcome to join. And I think it's a good place for them to kind of test the waters and see what it looks like. And they obviously do have to have children. Every now and again, I do let people join who do not have children, but maybe necessarily offering a service. And some of those are online services that are not necessarily based in Kentucky, but I do vet that it is an actual service and not any kind of scam. And I've knock on wood, have been really good at keeping any kind of scam or spammers out of my group so far. So I'm kind of pretty proud that the group does have 4,600 families, because I have kind of carefully made sure that I'm not just letting every person that requests get in. I deny them all the time. Every day I deny several people.
What kind of time frame has it taken for you to build that? Because if I remember your story correctly, homeschooling is relatively new to you and your family.
So I've homeschooled for 10 years.
Okay.
This is our 10th year. But I was not leading any kind of homeschool community for 10 years. That was not really a part of my plan.
So how long does it take you to build this?
That happened by accident. The group, let's see, I created the group in probably, I want to say, I'd have to look, but I'm going to guess July, I think was the month of 2020.
So in 3 years, roughly 3.5 years, 4,600 families have joined your group.
Yes.
And so where I'm getting at with the line of questions is that speaks to the volume of what homeschooling, the trend, the fad, the current thing of homeschooling is.
Yeah. And it's funny, David, because I've seen a trend over the last couple of years, because I have a love-hate relationship with the Facebook group. I love our families. Let me clarify. I love our families. I love our community. But adminning a Facebook group, I just want to go bang my head against this wall pretty often. And I'm the only admin, and I've always been the only admin. I don't have any moderators. I have nobody else. I've had lots of people offer to help me, but I don't, because of how the group got started. I've noticed, sometimes I get requests to join the group every day, a handful. Okay. But then all of a sudden, we'll go like a week or so where, every time I check my Facebook, oh my gosh, I've got a dozen requests. And I go sift through them, and I get on an hour or two later, and I've got another 5. And there's all these people joining. And I don't watch the news. I quit doing that some time ago for my own sanity. And sometimes I'll realize something's going on, and I'll start looking and realize something's happened. And, it'll usually be some sort of tragedy that's happened.
Sure.
Some sort of violence in schools, some sort of new piece of legislation that's either happened or is being threatened. And there'll just be this influx of families who are, okay, I want to look and see I've got an option. I want to explore that option. And like I said, those families are always welcome in my group. And I know in that number of that 4,600, there's definitely a good percentage of families who are not homeschooling, but they are still there kind of looking and watching. And I like to know that at least we're kind of there as a buffer. So if they do decide to come, and that group is spread out all over Kentucky. I think you were going to ask me that. We have members from all over the state.
But doesn't that speak to the current state of affairs, the widespread interest of what is best for my child? Again, I'm not speaking against public schools here.
Right.
I'm trying to be as in the middle here as I can, but doesn't that speak exactly to the concerns that every parent seems to be sharing of, I'm not sure what the hell is being taught to my child at school, that in a short period of time, you have 4,600 families, and every day you have requests to get into your group to research this particular topic.
It speaks volumes to the change in the climate.
Volumes. That's a great way to say it. I was trying to think of the right word.
And I think there's a lot of things that have caused that. And, and two, I think it's the availability. So I spoke a little bit on the curriculum availability. Unbelievable. And Amanda's like, yes. We're literally talking just a few handfuls of options years ago. Now we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of options. The internet, people's access to the internet has grown exponentially since the pandemic, because we realized how important it was if all of a sudden we have to be home. Also, so many jobs going remotely. And a lot of jobs staying remote has opened up the opportunity that okay, well, now my job just wants me to stay home. I know tons of people who are now permanently remotely working. Okay, well, wait a minute. I can make this work, especially if I have an older child. If you have a child that's upper elementary, if they've already learned to read and write, it's always kind of my thing. If your child already knows how to read and write, your job's going to be a lot easier as a homeschool, because teaching a child to read and write is definitely an art, a craft, and a sacrifice. So that is scary. So, but once they kind of establish that, then you're like, hey, I'm a mom. I've now been assigned to work remotely indefinitely. I have a 12-year-old, 13-year-old child. Hey, I think I could probably do this, because I can put them a desk right over here next to my desk, and I can make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do.
So that's a great point that you just made. If a child can read and write, so to the point of homeschooling, you can decide, a parent can decide to homeschool at any given point in time. Right? Absolutely.
Even mid-year. I get that question a lot.
Even mid-year.
Whenever. Yep.
So,
and the one thing I love to tell people, because you wouldn't believe how many people I have to explain this to. They're your child. They belong to you. I have parents ask me all the time, when can I take them out? Right now. Well, okay, I'm going to send in my letter of intent. Do I have to wait till they receive it? No, they're your child. They belong to you. You don't have to send them anywhere. You would be amazed. And this is where I said, I really see transformation happen in people's minds. And these are intelligent people. These are not just people who are like, oh, I'm stupid. I don't know how, I don't know how to think for myself. I mean, we're talking like intelligent people here. We have been so programmed as growing up in these certain systems that I literally have to remind people, they're your children. You don't have to take them anywhere. You just don't take them. Now, yes, you still need to take care of your paperwork, but you just stop. It's not on their timeline. Yes, you pull them out. You need to make sure that letter of intent's going out right then. You need to email the school out of courtesy. You need to let the school know that you're withdrawing your child. But you don't have to wait for them to receive that. They're your child. They belong to you.
What a powerful statement. Doesn't that speak to a whole other level of the way that society thinks anymore?
Yeah.
That it's
absolutely
your child. You can take them out today if you wish.
This is a funny story. We love bluegrass festivals, and years ago we went to one in Piketon, Ohio. It's awesome. I want to give them a little shout out. As a matter of fact, it's called Sam Jam. And Sammy Carr runs that bluegrass festival, and he is the man. That bluegrass festival is amazing. It's Piketon, Ohio, and I pulled my kids out of school for 2 days. Now, at that point, my Houston was homeschooling. He was doing the hybrid cottage school, so that wasn't a big deal. But then my older son, Stoney, was going to school, so I pulled him out for 2 days. And we were up there, with our friends and everything. And Stoney had actually brought some work because, he was missing school. And I said, just send the work with us. I'll make sure he gets it done. And so he'd go in during the daytime in the camper and work on his stuff. But I had several of our friends, older folks there that we were camping with and having fun with. And they said, how'd you get your kids out of school? I mean, aren't they supposed to be in school? Like, it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I took them out 2 or 3 days. And it's like right after Labor Day and all this. And I said, what do you mean? And they were like, how'd you get your kids out of school? I said, I just didn't take them. What do you mean? They're my children. I'm like, I don't have to send them anywhere if I don't want to. It blew minds. Like, what? You can just take your kids out of school. Yes, you can.
and that's funny. That is really funny, right? Because public schools have a whole division of people that are assigned to making sure your kids are in school.
Yes.
So it's almost as if they're contra to that you can't take your kids out of school because you want to.
Right. Well, and I do want to clarify, just for the sake of not causing any confusion in that. If your child is enrolled in public school, then absolutely you can still take them out whenever you want, but you will have to answer to them. And there could be legal ramifications if you don't. Yeah. Becoming truant is it's a legal issue, and they could hold you to the fire on it. You do have to you have to let them know. You have to give them an explanation as to why you're doing so and work through that process. So I do want to clarify that, because I don't want people thinking, I just don't have to send my kid to school. Yeah. But it's like people don't realize that you have the power to make these choices. And it's just sort of blown my mind over the years. I'll never forget them saying that. How'd you get your kids out of school? I'm like, what? I just didn't take them. And I was like, I let the school know, but like, you told them you were bringing them to a bluegrass festival? And I was like, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I remember taking our daughter to a few places, and I was never really concerned, I guess,
Right.
or not to a big level of concern,
Right.
but there's that thing, right, that's inside you to say, I wonder if they're going to approve it.
Right.
They always did, right? But we followed the process. We did our
Right.
forms, but I didn't give weight to the fact that, I think it was cultural enrichment or something. You had to prove cultural enrichment or something. And I don't know what
There's
we did,
nothing
but-
more culturally enriching than a bluegrass festival, too, by the way. I would just like to throw that out there in case you've never been.
Simply, I have not, but I'm a big fan
You're
of.
going with this next year.
We're
There's one
in.
in Lexington you go with this next
I'm
year.
a huge fan of bluegrass music and the musicianship that goes into it and the harmonies that go into it. And,
Oh, yes.
all the different stuff that goes into it. So yeah, we're in. Yeah, we're in.
You need to go with us next year.
All right, it's a date.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get to the groups.
Yeah. Can we take a short break before we
Let's
get
take
to the groups? Yeah.
Let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We've never had a pee break before. So that's kind of exciting for us to have our first pee break. So
break.
Yeah. Thanks for
Requesting
introducing it. Yeah.
Hey, I'm a mom.
That's right. All right. So we were talking about your group.
The group, yeah.
And I think that's just from following you a little bit, it's pretty impressive to see. And I don't
Thank you.
truly
Appreciate
understand it. Right. So talking about your field trips, et cetera. So let's talk about how your groups got started and what that looked like.
So my group got started kind of, I don't want to say on accident, but it was not planned. And so what happened is the pandemic started, right? And there was this big disaster as far as like, well, how are the children going to get educated? And I had a lot of people reaching out to me because people knew that I had been homeschooling for a while. That was something that, I shared on social media. I shared with people I was proud of, my family was proud of, because it's a sacrifice to homeschool. It's definitely a huge endeavor. And all of a sudden I had people that I cared about contacting me. Just all across the board, people from my community, people I'd grown up with, went to school with, even some of their parents. I had grandparents that were my parents' age contacting me like, hey, my daughter, she's really upset about, what are we going to do here? And I know you've been homeschooling, and I've told her I can help her. And I was very impressed by the fact that my parents' generation, the grandparent generation, a lot of them are really stepping up to the plate. Like, hey, I will help with this. Like, there's a crisis here. And I was really upset when the pandemic started for a variety of reasons, like we all were. But one thing that was really important to me was my children, because as you know, I'd always invested highly in their education. And I was like, man, there's a lot of kids. There's just going to be a big problem here. We can't just forget about the children. We can hit pause on school for a couple weeks max.
Right.
But we can't just like wing it forever.
Right.
Like this is important because they're young, and, like we have this very short time period that we need to be trying to mold them and fill into them and pour into them. And so that they're not all of a sudden adults and we're like, oh yeah, well the pandemic. So, they lost all this time. Time is short with children and precious. And so I had all these people contacting me, and I felt very passionate because of the people who were contacting me that I wanted to make sure that I was giving them the best information possible. Because like I said, these weren't strangers. These were people that had done things for me, people that loved me, who loved my family, who loved, And so I found myself all of a sudden becoming like a homeschool advisor. And I was spending a lot of time because it's clear and cut in Kentucky. If we're going to explain the process, it's short, sweet, to the point, simple. But there's the bigger issues, like what does a homeschool day look like? Well, how do you decide the curriculum? Well, what if I'm this? Well, what if that? Blah, blah, blah. And so I was spending a lot of time with people through text message, phone calls. I might have somebody call me that I care about, like somebody that helped cook the food for my wedding. They're wanting to try to help their daughter homeschool their grandchild. It's not a 10-minute conversation. It's an hour and a half, 2-hour conversation. They're taking notes over the phone. They're all these questions. I started to realize after there was just all these random people reaching out to me that it would make sense if I could somehow create some sort of short videos or something to kind of like cover the basics to streamline that process, because I wasn't getting paid for this. It's not like it was a job or a side gig. It was just me helping people that were asking for help. So I wasn't really that savvy when it came to technology and, Facebook and all this, but I somehow managed to create this Facebook group. And when I first created, I was literally creating it for like around maybe 30 families. So I think that's why I've kind of stuck to that process. I was very selective in the beginning. Like this was literally just for like 30 families, and they started adding people, and it just kept growing and growing. And so I was doing like short videos, and I was, putting in like, I finally learned how to do a pin post where I could share the document from the Department of Education and do these kinds of things. Is like, okay, this is how to homeschool. So we're going to start, right here. You need to send in your letter of intent. This is how you do it. Here is a sample letter of intent, and kind of walking people through that process. And the group just started growing and growing and growing. So that was how it got started. Then I was also very selective about what I would let people post in that group as we started to have members, when I started allowing members to come in who were strangers, complete strangers. I really kept a hold on like, I'm not going to let people come in here and talk politics, complain about the pandemic, bring up unrelated subjects, argue, start drama, ask the same questions over and over. Like, the information's here. I will tell you how to find it, but you're going to have to find it. You're going to have to if you can't do the legwork, then you can't homeschool your child. Nobody's going to hate it. And I've had to tell a few parents that before. If you want someone to do it for you and hand it to you, then you need to send them to public school. You have to do this yourself. You're going to have to do the legwork. You cannot count on somebody else to do all the work for you and hand it to you on a platter. So I kept a really tight grip on that, and the group just kept growing. And how the field trips came about was that one of the things that I was most determined about during the pandemic, because I lost a lot because of the pandemic. Businesses, things that I had worked for years on by myself, invested a lot of time, money, and effort that were important to me. And instead of dwelling on that, I decided we're going to focus on what's important here. And obviously it was my kids. It was very important to me that the pandemic have the least amount of effect on my kids as possible. So we just kind of kept life going just like we always had. I still wanted them to see their friends. I still wanted us to go out. I was not going to hole us up inside a hole. I just was not going to do it. So it kind of started out that I started allowing a few families to bring their children to me one day a week on our little farm, and I would teach their children for 3 or 4 hours. And it was more kind of like elective classes. And Melissa, that you guys interviewed, actually did that with me right off the bat. She came and taught them how to bind books, and she also worked with them on their writing skills. And so we started we would do one semester and do a variety of things, like we would do nature study. We would do a music study and learn about a composer in history, do an artist study, learn about an artist from history. We had a good friend, Angela, came one semester, and she's bilingual, and she taught the children Spanish for a semester. And we had kids from all ages. It was almost kind of like the one room schoolhouse kind of concept. And we were talking I think the most kids I ever had in one group was like maybe 15 kids. And it was great. And, I want to say that during that time period, I felt really blessed by the children that I was able to shepherd over. They were as important to me as I was to them. It was really important to me. I felt like it was important, even though it's not what I planned for, and it's not necessarily what I wanted to do. It felt important to me, to have those kids and let's keep this normalcy. So, there we are at my house, tables outside and in the barn or in the basement, learning and doing this. And I wanted to keep the kids going out and doing things. So I said, let's start doing field trips. And I'm going to tell you that year of 2020 was very difficult to book field trips. And I will eternally be grateful for the places that were willing to still allow us to come in. That, okay, well, maybe because homeschoolers, primarily speaking, would not wear masks, even if they were required. So it created some obstacles in working. So I was kind of leaning towards more doing field trips with private establishments as opposed to like state parks and, city run museums and stuff like that. More flexibility with private companies and businesses. And people love the field trips. And so I was like, okay, we'll do one a month. And that was sort of like my goal. And we kept doing it, and we kept doing it, and we kept doing it. And I have put a lot of effort into coming up with very carefully curated field trips that are unique, that is not just an experience like we talked about for the children, but for the whole family. And so now here we are 3 years later. I've kept doing a field trip just about every month of the year, even through the summer. Every now and again, I'll have to take like a month. A lot of times it's the month of January. I'll have to be like, okay, we're just going to lay low this month. But I try to do a field trip every month. And, like our field trips will literally be newborns up to 80-year-olds. Like, and because families have learned that I am very intentional about our field trips, like they'll invite the grandparents. Like, they'll be like, is it okay if my mom comes? It's like a grandmother's like, well, yeah, she can come. They're getting experiences that they never had before either. So right now, when I book a field trip, I generally will try to get a venue to agree to 100 people. Wow. Not everybody can do that. That's fine.
That's right.
Sometimes we have to split the group. I'll be like, okay, well, could you do this 50 at 10 a.m. and 50 at 2 p.m.? I try to split it up because I know that I can almost always get 100. So if I can gear it towards 100. And so right now the field trips are becoming so big that I'm kind of like wanting to maybe expand on that model a little bit of how we go forward with that, because oftentimes now if I book a field trip, I'll try to open up to 100 people. I'll have 100 sign up within a couple hours. And then I need to do a wait list. And
out of your Facebook group.
Out of my Facebook group. Wow. And then a lot of times I can then, okay, well, I'll take out, 50 maybe on a wait list or something like that. And the thing is that people have learned about me is that my field trips are legit. Like if I've never canceled a field trip. I mean, I've even went sick to them before and been like, okay, y'all are just going to have to keep your distance, or I'm going to stay out in the car or something. Like I will not cancel a field trip. They know that if I book it, it will happen. Like we're going, it's going to happen. And people know that I spend a lot of time and effort planning that for our group. And it gets more complicated now that we're several years in. Cause like, I'm kind of like, okay, what do we do now? But I try to book them all over the state of Kentucky. Obviously I do tend to book more in central Kentucky just because that's where I'm located. A lot of my members are located in central Kentucky because they've learned about my group through people that I knew or whatever. But I do try to move us around the state because I don't want to leave people out. There's other communities of homeschoolers and, in the mountains or down in Western Kentucky or Southern Kentucky. And they're like, we want to get in on this too. And so we do try to move around.
And it's hard enough to get 5 people to do something, but you're saying within a couple of hours of putting out a concept for a field trip, you've got 100 people. You've sold out your field trip, and you're creating a waiting list. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah,
and I do think it's because I've built that reputation over time of people knowing that like my field trips will happen. Yeah, because sometimes people have great ideas, but then they can't execute them. I've
got a couple questions here. I'm not sure which one to go with first. Let's go with, since we're talking about your groups, is there any regulation on homeschooling? Meaning, I know there's regulation as far as you got to cover certain topics, but I think what I'm trying to get at is I don't think that you're trying to tell me that you're positioning yourself as anyone particular in the world of homeschooling.
Yeah, no.
But is that an issue that you run into, that people are trying to become the go-to person, I guess, in homeschooling?
Absolutely.
Why is that important not to have that? Or is it important? I mean, let's talk about that. Is that an issue?
It is. And I know that it's ruffled some feathers, that I have people who come to me for information or rely on my group. There's several organizations that have existed for a good bit of time, even, prior to the pandemic. And I do think that it sort of irritates people I feel like it irritates certain people that I will not subscribe to a particular organization so is there like a regulatory organization? Yes and no. Yes, there is. It's the Department of Education. That is the regulatory organization. That is who you answer to. At the end of the day, you answer to the director of pupil personnel in your county that you are districted for. They are the ones it is their job to uphold the law and to make sure that you are compliant. So yes, they are absolutely a regulatory body. The other organizations that exist are generally nonprofit. I don't know, some of them might actually be profit, are there to provide a service, right? To provide help or assistance for families getting started. So in essence, like what I have done, but they are an actual, they're an actual organization where I don't have a business name. I don't have an LLC. I'm not incorporated. This is just me, just participating with the community. it has bothered some people that I will not align with some of these organizations. The reason that I will not align with them is for several reasons. It's the same reason I don't send my kids to school.
I was going to say, isn't that the same thing?
It sort of takes away the essence of the whole point.
Right.
And I find it interesting that people are immediately looking for somebody to go and be told what to do. It's like, well, isn't this why you're homeschooling? Oftentimes I feel like there's a little bit of misleading in those organizations, and several of them are Christian-based organizations. And here's the thing that I've recognized and appreciate and respect is that not all homeschoolers are Christian. So it does not help them to get their information from Christian-only organizations. And they don't have to, because those organizations are not the regulatory body. They need to understand the laws of the state. They need to always be in compliance with those laws. Everything else, it's optional, right? Mm-hmm. So do I want to get my information from one organization or another? Sure. I tend to go with what is easiest, what is the clearest information, and what makes the most sense. So I lead all of the people in my group to the document that is provided by the Kentucky Department of Education, which a lot of people have some opinions on me leading people to that document. I have used that document for 10 years.
What is that document?
That is the document that explains what the law and the requirements are to homeschool in Kentucky.
Okay. Which we'll put a link to in our show notes.
It's like 6 pages. And I think the 6th page is the sample letter of the letter of intent. I'd prefer this document because it is very short, sweet, and to the point. And they also include the links to the KRS, to the statutes of Kentucky state law. If you go directly to, that document, they're hyperlinks. So if you actually want to read the law for yourself, right there it is, just click it and it'll tell you exactly what it is. It's just very clear and concise. There's no reason, in my opinion, to add fluff from attorneys or from people who have a big opinion on homeschooling. And I'm not going to offer that to the community. It's like you asking me my opinion. Sure, I'll give it to you. But I'm not going to state my opinion as some sort of authoritarian, this is the way it is. It's dangerous to do that with families. Here's the law. Read it for yourself. Follow these clear instructions. Start there, and then start learning about curriculum. Start learning from other families what a typical day looks like, what kind of curriculum options there are, which one's the best for your child. You asked about curriculum earlier too, and it's like, a lot of families don't use, so like for us, we don't use one curriculum for every subject. Because, like some curriculums that are offered might be really strong in, say, English and then really weak in science. So I don't always necessarily subscribe to let's pick one curriculum and put all of our eggs in that basket.
But do you think that speaks to society as I don't know how to word this. Society is looking for direction and instruction and a step-by-step of how to do something.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is that homeschooling doesn't have to be that complicated.
Not in Kentucky. It does not have to be that complicated here. No.
Yeah, that's right. I think every state is different, right?
Every state is different. Yes. And Kentucky is a great state to homeschool your kids in. And that's why there's no need for the extra fluff. And there's also no reason to confuse people and try to persuade their opinion on whether or not we need to provide this information to the government. It's not a choice. We have to do what the government requires of us, and we have to move on from there.
It also gives you a lot of flexibility and autonomy.
That's right. It absolutely does. And that's why I disagree with the people who want me to hyperlink other organizations' information on how to get started, because I can send somebody to a 6-page document, or I can send them to a 12-page document that has paragraph upon paragraph of an attorney that has decided to insert their opinion on what they think it should look like. That's not helpful to most folks. Yeah. Folks need to know, what am I required to do? That's all they need to know. That's where we start. And, I get parents all the time in the group. They're just scared. They're overwhelmed. Oh, gosh, help me. And I'm like, let's just start with the letter of intent. Let's do that. Let's get your child withdrawn. Take that first day to decompress. Just read the first day. Play Legos the first day. Do you think they don't do that in public school? Because they do. Right. It usually takes them about a week or so to get started. Take that decompression time. You've got the internet. Hallelujah. Get in some of these, homeschool Facebook groups. Start looking at what options are out there, what other people are doing, what works for them, what doesn't, and start to develop that over your first month. And that changes every year. And I tell people that all the time. You have to be flexible when you homeschool. You cannot say, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my children's education. No, you have to be flexible. I had somebody give me the best advice, and I still give this to families all the time. When we decided to homeschool, we were part of a small group, and most of the parents in that were older than us. And my husband and I had a woman who I adore. She had homeschooled a couple of her kids, back before it was cool and, popular. And she said, somebody told me this. I'm going to tell it to you. She said, when you homeschool, you can't go into it saying, I'm going to homeschool my kid K through 12. You can't do that. You have to go into it and set yourself a goal and set yourself to, I am going to homeschool my kid this year. And put that accountability there, that you're going to try it for this year, and that it may not be perfect and it may fall apart, but you're going to do it this year. If you go into it saying, I'm going to do it forever, you're setting yourself up for failure, because you don't know what your life could look like next year. Mm-hmm. You could end up in a divorce. You could end up sick. You could end up with someone dying. You could end up in a major financial crisis, and you may not have a choice than to choose other options. It's not good for the parent. It's not good for the brain, and it's overwhelming.
How do you manage that, Joe? Right? Because what I would take away from that is, and maybe I'm not a gambler, right? I'm a pretty safe playing person, so I would take the known consistent then of, well, I'm not sure what next year looks like, so I'd be fearful that I wouldn't prepare my child for what's
to go
next.
back into public school.
Yeah, to go back.
So that's the thing that parents worry about a lot. And I've never heard of a homeschooling family that's had trouble reentering their child into public school. And oftentimes they will come back and then the school will be like, well, they're actually further ahead
of the game,
because they're getting more of that individualized. And that's not always the case. I mean, like we've said tonight, we have to be careful about putting broad sweeping strokes, because, sometimes people homeschooling is a failure. And, and I admire people who at least recognize that and say, okay, I can't do this. I'm going to let someone else do this. That is needed. If you can't do it, you need to let somebody else. And that's why I say, don't set yourself up for failure. Maybe you end up with cancer and you cannot homeschool your kid anymore because you're trying to take care of your body. Let somebody else do it. Send them back to public school, send them to wherever. So, you re-enter your child into school, and simple as that.
So let's talk about some of the gaps of homeschooling. There's got to be gaps in this as well, right? What does that look like? Where's the gap here?
I would say personally, and obviously I'm a big supporter of homeschooling, I feel like that homeschooling is filling gaps that are much needed in society. And I hope that society is very appreciative of that in the future, because right now we're seeing, okay, I need a plumber. Well, good luck getting one to show up. I need an electrician. I need this. I need that. These skilled trades. Anybody that works in skilled labor right now, especially if they're 35 plus, 40 years plus, you're hearing this from them. Oh, we're having trouble getting young people in. And when we do, they're not lasting very long. I mean, I preach this to old guys I know all the time, and I say old guys, they're not really old. I'm just giving them a hard time. But like men right now that I know, say between the ages of 40 and 60, I'm like, you need to make sure your employer is paying you top dollar. Because you are so needed right now in these skilled labor positions. My husband's he paints cars, he's an auto body painter. They're experiencing that in his trade significantly. Many trades are experiencing that. There is just not an influx of young people entering into these trades, which begs the question of what are we going to do in the future?
Right.
If they can't get the robots to do it, then we're going to be screwed on a lot of levels. So what I really see happening with homeschool families is that they are teaching their children that. Because see, this is the other thing about homeschool families. A lot of homeschool families are not worried about whether or not their children are going to go to college, because they have broken free of those constructs of what we must do. We've had enough time now to see, okay, wait a minute, a college degree does not necessarily equate to success and productivity as an adult. And as a matter of fact, it can actually have the opposite effect. You go into restaurants, very common for servers, bartenders to have bachelor's, some of them master's degrees. They're working to pay off their student debt, and they have still never been able to enter into the career in which they thought they were going to enter into. Mm-hmm. So I think that homeschoolers, especially because they've taken such a microscopic look at education as a whole, have realized that, you know what, sometimes college is just a sham. And it's something that has been fed to the American people through the device of the public education system. That is not to say that college is not needed. I want to make sure we say that because we all know that. And that's not to say that it's all bad. But homeschoolers, I think, are more hyper aware that we don't have to pigeonhole our children and start them out right from the very beginning. Oh, we got to be college ready, college ready, college ready. You know, and there's plenty of homeschoolers who do have college ready children. Our neighbor homeschools. She's 6 boys. And the youngest she's still homeschooling. The youngest is 16. The others have graduated. Every one of her boys has went to college, and I think every one of them has went on a scholarship. So homeschool kids can go right into college, right into scholarships, no problem. But that is not everyone's path. And I think that homeschoolers are more aware of that we don't have to set children up for this expectation that every single person is going to go to college, because it is not ideal. So, and because homeschoolers can decide what a child's homeschool day looks like. If I have a child, I see that this child is good at a certain thing or has a very big interest in a certain thing, I can incorporate that into their day. And I think that what we're going to see is a lot of people entering into trade positions that are going to be children who were homeschooled. They're going to be the ones that are going to come in and start filling these gaps of like plumbers, electricians, you know, all these different things that we're seeing a lull in right now.
Right.
And, you know, and I know this because of being a part of the homeschool community. I mean, I know people's kids who do amazing things. I know people who their children are taking blacksmithing classes.
Right.
You know, they're taking culinary classes. I've got a friend who her children are studying hydroponics this year as a part of their, you know, hands-on project for the year. That's just an addition to the regular, you know, work they're doing every day. So you really see homeschoolers doing this really cool variety of things that they're learning that I feel like a lot of times would not be pushed or have the opportunity if they were in traditional schooling.
That's a great topic, or great point that you make. You know, I'm a big fan of Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs, right? And then is it Mike Rowe Works or America Works or whatever his program is? I'm sure I've messed that up, but talking about skilled labor and the lack of skilled labor that exists in our country, and there seems to be no farm system to get people, you know, back into the skilled labor.
Right.
Because we've been pre-programmed that, and including myself, that we've been pre-programmed that you must obtain this college degree, and without a college degree, then there's no path forward. And it's not to take away from the college degrees, but there's sure is something to be said about the skilled labor that exists.
Right. And a lot of those programs, from my understanding, have been removed from the public education system, you know, plan. And from what my understanding has been is that, you know, you ask people like, well, what about home economics? What about shop? What about some of these things like we did in high school? Right. And people are like, yeah, I don't really do that anymore. Now, some of those programs still exist, and like Fayette County even has some of these kinds of programs. But if you try to go and look into those programs, like maybe I want my child to go into that program, you start to realize that those programs have been, you know, adapted and implemented as a way to try to save some children from an alternative being the penitentiary. Okay. So a lot of times, you know, you look at a great program. Fayette County had a great program. I was trying to get my stepson in years ago. It was like an equestrian program that was housed at Kentucky Horse Park. Amazing program. Amazing principal. He passed away here recently, but just amazing. I mean, and this was exactly what my stepson wanted to do with his life. He was just, you know, really wanted, and I thought, oh, this is great. We'll get him into this program. You know, and he'll be able to come out of high school and not just be a farmhand. You know, he can come out of high school and have this training that he's done, and he'd be like a farm manager, you know, because you can go to college for that, but let's just be honest, you don't usually need to, right? You can go other pathways, and he didn't like school enough to, I felt like, okay, you know, he's going to go into college. And when I applied him for the program and took him out there and we did everything, they were really confused as to why I wanted him in that program. And it took me a little while to realize it's because he'd never been in trouble at school. He had decent grades. This program was designed for children who had been in a lot of trouble. This program was designed for children who were not very good at school.
How did you manage that, right? Because I don't know.
He ended up not going, and they were willing to accept him, but we sort of got into an issue like, oh, so we're going to putting kind of with a group of kids that have had some problems, you know,
You're right.
are having some issues. It's almost like these programs have been implemented as like a divergency program. They're trying to divert, you know, we don't want these children to end up in jail. We don't want them to end up, you know, it's like we want to change their path of education to help with that. And I think that that's sad and also really strange to me, because it's like, just because you want to work with your hands doesn't mean that you're not as smart as someone else, or that you come from a bad home, or you have a bad home life, or you're getting in trouble at school, or have these other issues going on. Like, why can't you just be interested in that and be good at that? So I do think some of those programs are still there, but my understanding is that they have been more created as divergency programs.
Yeah, how interesting, right?
Yeah.
How interesting.
And then homeschoolers are not looking at it from that perspective.
That's right.
And homeschoolers are supportive of that. Like, oh, my kid wants to, you know, like I told you my son, 18, is working on being an electrician. That's great. You know, and I had a lot of people ask me, like, when they knew it was around the time for him to graduate, they're like, oh, is he going to go to college? And I'm like, no. And they're like, oh, he's not. And I'm like, no, that's never been the plan for him. I went to college. You shouldn't go to college unless you love school. If you are in middle school and high school and you are struggling, you're not designed for college. You have to want to go to college. You know what I mean? Like, you can't be a terrible, and I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in my opinion, you cannot be a terrible student your whole life and then go into college and suddenly the light switches.
What I'm hearing from you is there's not a formula, a geometry formula, right? There's not a formula for success. I mean, each kid, each family has a different path to it. And so the general formula is, out of high school, you go to college, you graduate and you go to college, but that doesn't fit everyby's formula. So
absolutely not.
This ability gives you some flexibility to that, to customize it for your child.
And that's too, you saying that is a good point to bring up too, is that's one of the really big benefits. And I think what draws a lot of people to homeschooling is that you can individualize the program. It's difficult to do that in a school environment, whether it be public school or private school, because it's just the logistics of it. If you have 30 kids in a class, you can't cater to every individual child.
Right.
You know, they can, and they try to make adjustments. Like, there's the advanced classes and there's, you know, remedial classes. And okay, we're going to try to move people around where they are, you know, get them the help they need or advance them the way we want to. But especially if you have a child that's advanced, you oftentimes hit roadblocks with that when it comes to the government funded schools, because there's only so much money going into those advanced programs. There's only so many seats. Well, what if your child's really, really good and there's only one seat and they don't get it? So then what? They're just supposed to be like, oh, well, luck of the draw. There's a lottery for you. When you have homeschool and, you know, even within one homeschool family, if you got 3 kids, they're not all going to be the same, even one in the same family, right? You can individualize that education a lot easier, more practically, because you're doing it at home. You can provide the better attention to each child that, okay, this child of mine is really interested in this. So I want to focus this for this child, and this child is really good at this. And one thing too that I've told parents that I think is a benefit to homeschooling that is counter to what I have personally seen with public school. It's kind of run through like a simple example. If I'm in school and I am poor, I'm good at reading, I'm good at writing, but I'm not very good at mathematics. So the focus is going to be on mathematics. We're going to design this child. We need to get them a tutor. We need to focus on their weakness. Their weakness is math. We need to focus on that. We need to get them up to where everybody else is, right? We need to focus on that. Oh yeah, they're good at reading and writing, so we don't need to worry about that much. They're great at that. They're above everybody on that. So we really need to concert our efforts towards getting them where everybody else is on math. When you homeschool, you can flip that. You can focus on their strengths and not on their weaknesses. Now, does that mean you just say, forget math? Well, of course you don't. You still do math. But you realize math is not my child's strong point. So my child is not going to grow up and go to college and take calculus and do a job where they're required to do math. Their brain doesn't work that way. My child is good at this. So I am still going to try to keep my child on track. I am still going to keep them learning math. I'm still going to go out of my way for that. But I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on their strengths and not their weaknesses. And a lot of what I have seen in my personal experience, at least with the public schools, is that it is opposite of that. There is a focus on the weaknesses and not on the strengths.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Customizable.
We want to make people individuals. I think it's like that kind of thing we were talking about, like what were the schools designed for? It's kind of like that cookie cutter idea.
Right.
Whereas when we're homeschooling, we don't have to apply the cookie cutter method. We can treat each child as an individual, and then that's what they'll become. They will become their own individual person.
So a person that is, I'm not sure how to phrase this, a not stay-at-home parent. Mm-hmm. How do they accomplish this, right? Because we've talked a lot in our time here tonight that the benefits of this thing and the gaps of this thing, right? But can this fit into in today's economy? It seems like everybody that can work needs to be working in order to pay for groceries or whatever else, right? And so I would think that whoever's listening to this show would say, I'd love to do what Jennifer's saying to do, but you know what? I've got to work every day. I can't do this. How does that work? How does that fit?
So families have gotten really creative about that. And the one thing, and I think that I'm glad you brought this up because it's really important for families to understand. And, I'll have people post in the group. Sometimes they'll say, is there any parents on here who work in homeschool? Excuse me. And I'll always say, I've done it for 10 years. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Is it possible? Absolutely yes. You have to be very creative. The one thing about homeschooling is that it is a commitment and it is a sacrifice. And I think that it is a sacrifice that a lot of people do not realize, and people oftentimes will think, well, only wealthy people can homeschool. Not true at all. What happens is families make a choice, and oftentimes families will do without other things so that they can make this choice. It's asinine to believe, only the wealthy, only the privileged get to homeschool. I would argue we're all privileged in America, but that's for another show. Mm-hmm. You have to pick and choose what's important to you. And we all do that as Americans. This is what's irritating to me. People, that's so expensive, but then they go buy Starbucks coffee every day. You pick and choose what you spend your money on, right? So, it's no big deal at all for homeschool families to not be going out and buying brand new clothes, not be putting Nike shoes on their kids. They don't go on vacations. I mean, do some do? Yes, of course.
Sure. But
don't think that they all do. There's a sacrifice being made. And a lot of times that is that one parent is either going to stay home and not work at all, or that parent is going to work a part-time job when in all reality, they could be working full-time. They're a fully capable worker. So there is that sacrifice. You see people doing, and because of the flexibility of the schedule, it is possible to work and homeschool, and also depending on the age of the child, and do both. It might mean that parents are piggybacking. So I work these days and you homeschool. You work these days and I do the homeschool. You see grandparents, like I said, stepping up to the plate. Grandparents might fill in a day or two. Neighbors, other homeschool moms. There's co-ops you can take your kids to. So parents have to be really creative on how am I going to set the schedule up? How can I make this feasibly possible?
It's really no different than a babysitting
That's right.
Schedule,
yeah,
right?
It is. And that's one thing I always have to explain oftentimes to venues when I'm booking field trips is that, we can't do anything expensive because homeschool families in general, I know that if I'm going to book a field trip, it cannot be inexpensive. It needs to be free or very, reasonably priced because there's some homeschool families that are very large. So it's nothing for a family of 8 to sign up, but even if it's not a family of 8, typically there's at least a couple kids, maybe 3, 4. And the thing you have to remember is that all of those children are staying home with one parent, which means there's already a financial sacrifice being made. So this family can't afford to go and pay $15 per child and $15 for an adult to get in a field trip. It has to be feasible. The other thing with the venues when I book them is that I explain to them that it has to be all ages friendly because homeschool families will not sign up for something. And I'd love to book some field trips where I could go, okay, this field trip is for ages 12 and up. And it's a whole nother conversation of trying to keep space for the teenagers, right? Because the poor teenagers end up with a lot of littles as part of it.
Right.
I do think there's some benefits to that too. I think that it is good for children to be around each other at different ages. It creates a level of respect with one another. But I can't do that. If I say it's 12 and up, nobody will sign up because a mom that has 3 kids, she's got one 12-year-old, she's dying to get her 12-year-old in something that's just for bigger kids. But how's she going to drive that kid 30, 45 minutes from here? Who's going to watch the other 2?
Right.
So you have to kind of maneuver that, but it is totally possible. And I think it's becoming more possible because of the stay-at-home working, because there's a lot more opportunities now for people to work from home so they can kind of, work that into their day.
Yeah. Let's talk about what I think
and I would like to mention, too, that not all is all moms homeschooling. There are families that I know of that the dads are homeschooling. Yeah. The mom might be going and doing a job, and the dad is staying home and homeschooling. So I want to give the men the credit because it's not all the moms.
Well, that's an excellent point, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some assumptions that I think that are made, and so that's a great point to make. Let's talk about what I think is maybe one of the well, to me, the ignorant here. The biggest point of this is how do homeschool kids socialize, and how do they get intertwined into whether it's school athletics, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a question that a lot of people have or concern, I should say, is they're like, I'm afraid to do this to my kid because I feel like this is going to socially isolate them. So there's a couple things to bring up about that. Now, one thing, let's start. You mentioned the sports. Now, sports is tricky. It doesn't have to be, but the state of Kentucky makes it very difficult.
I was going to say, that's not your choice to make it tricky.
Right. And that has more to do with, and I didn't do sports, so I'm going to have a little bit of ignorance here, but it's like the Kentucky state that regulates the high school athletics program. KHSAA, yeah.
Yeah, Kentucky High School Athletic
That's their choice. So they've had a really staunch response on like that homeschool kids cannot participate. So what happens is sometimes you'll see like elementary and middle school might allow a homeschool family to participate with their district at school, but then when they get to high school, they're pretty much just out. That's going to default back. The school might be more than, and in all honesty, I think schools would love it because schools are not going to turn away good athletes. So if it's a homeschooled kid that's a wonderful athlete and they're districted for their district, they want them. Don't think it's not the schools that don't want them, but it's the governing body that has had a position on like, no.
But doesn't each county get to decide that?
Each county gets to decide that. And so some counties do allow their children to participate in sports. But again, once you get to the high school level, they will not allow the teams to participate with the KHSAA.
I mean,
yes, because their position is that the children cannot be homeschooled. So high schools are not going to let football players be on their team and then get exempted from tournaments because of that. And that's what would happen. But people have been really creative. There has been a lot of organizations that have come about just in the last few years or really amped up their efforts to provide sports for homeschooling kids. And I've heard of homeschooling kids doing very unique things like jousting and really, really good at archery and, taekwondo and all these other things. So it is totally possible. I do think it's growing. I do think it'll change in the future too. I think that we'll start seeing a lot more opportunities. And in my group, we have several groups that come into my Facebook group and advertise sports for children.
Do you think that's another form of governmental control?
I do.
We talked about that earlier, right? That, okay, well, we may not be able to stop you on curriculum and, everything else, but the golden ticket is you can't play football or basketball.
Right. It's dangling in front of their face. Yeah. And I do think that has a lot to do with it. Yeah. I think that's why KHSAA probably has that position on it, is that it's just another deterrent to keep people from homeschooling.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating because, we haven't really talked about like the financial standpoint, but I think, you may or may not know this, but just because you homeschool doesn't mean that you don't still have to pay school tax. So we still pay school tax whether we homeschool or not. The difference is that we pay into a program that we don't benefit from. Which very unpopular opinion, but some states will give homeschoolers some of their money back through voucher programs and, through these like kind of school choice programs. Kentucky does not. And
what an irony,
teachers
right?
Have
because
fought that very hard.
You have to pay into the school tax,
but we don't get any benefit back.
But you can't play high school football, or you can't be on the on the high school soccer team or whatever else. But
and you don't get any help with your curriculum. And some states will give you money. I mean, even California does. I mean, California gives the money. Now, they have very strict stipulations on how that money is spent on their homeschool curriculum, but at least they're giving them some of their money back. And that's one thing that I see oftentimes, which is really kind of sad to me, when some new people, usually young people, come into the group. They're really wanting to homeschool and they're like, I can't afford this. How do I afford the curriculum? And luckily there are options. There are programs and things that are free, but it's just like everything else. Oftentimes with the free ones, it's not fully what you could be doing, what you need. And I do tell parents something they need to know going into it. It is an investment. You are going to spend money on your homeschool curriculum. You are going to spend money. Now, you save money too. And I'd like to point that out. You don't have to go and buy $500 worth of clothes and $100 brand new pair of shoes in August because your kid's not going anywhere, And yeah, do I still buy my kids like school clothes? No, but I do buy them fresh clothes a couple times a year, like when they outgrow them. But we don't have that expectation of, oh, it's August. We have to get all new everything. School supplies is a big savings. I hear parents and friends of mine who children are in public school. I mean, it's unreal now what people spend on school supplies. I mean, I'm hearing people saying $150, $200 a kid. And then you got school fees. I don't know what some of the smaller counties do, but I can tell you that Fayette County really adds those fees on pretty hefty when your child's in high school.
Let me put you on the
School
spot
lunch,
there with the fees. The latest trend and seems to be that every school teacher is saying, hey, buy my school supplies for me.
Right.
I don't know if that's putting you on the spot or not, but it just seems like an interesting trend to say you want to decorate your classroom like all in camo for hunting or whatever else. So therefore the parents should buy all the school supplies for you. That just seems really goofy to me.
So I think, so my opinion on that is that the one thing, and because when I had children in public school in Fayette County, I did sit on these boards that we talked about. And I served as SBDM parent multiple years at multiple schools. Yep. So, when you're on SBDM, you see how the money is spent. You see how the money goes. There's tons of money wasted. Let's just go ahead and be real honest about that. There was plenty of times I had questions about the excessive waste of money. Also, when I was on the PTA board, I had questions about that. But they're not providing that money to the teachers. So they're like, here's an empty classroom. There you go. Anything you want, you're going to have to buy yourself. So should the teacher ask the parent? Probably. Yeah. And growing up, my mom was always PTA president. She was always at the school. She would buy those things. She would complain about them, but she also would never hesitate. And I think it's because she wanted us to have a certain experience. And I do think this kind of goes back to what we talked about a while ago about whose responsibility is it, right? Your children are your responsibility, no matter what school you send them to. So, if you're sending them to a public school and you want them to have a really great experience, then you probably should be helping the teacher buy the school supplies. Should the government be paying for that? Yes. Could they? Yes. If some of the administrators would stop wasting money on other things, there would be money for that. And I'm sure a lot of teachers would agree with that. We don't need to send our administrators to training all the time. Those monies could be funneled right back into the classrooms.
There's a whole lot there, right?
A lot there. Yeah. Overpaid administrators, unnecessary trainings, programs that go nowhere. There's definitely a large waste. Is what I saw.
We have covered a ton of stuff about homeschooling.
Yeah.
What else have I not asked, or what else is out there that we need to cover here?
The one thing I want to say is we were sort of kind of going down about the socialization. We talked about the sports, but let's circle back to that for at least a minute.
Sure.
So that's a huge fear for parents, and I can understand why it is. And one thing I kind of like to walk parents through on that is that, first of all, my personal experience is that I think that homeschool kids are oftentimes much more diversely socialized than their counterparts that are going into traditional school. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are around younger children, older children. They usually can speak to adults better because they are used to interacting with adults often. There is plenty of opportunities, especially now, to continue to keep your child socialized. With homeschooling, you have to be much more intentional about it. You can't just be sitting there at your home waiting on people to show up. You have to go out of your way, sign up for my field trips, join a co-op. The Lexington Public Library has been doing all kinds of amazing things for homeschool kids at least the last year for sure. There is all kinds of opportunities like that you can get your child out and have some time built into their day, their week, whatever, where they are around other children, where they're experiencing families and people who are coming from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and getting to have that interaction, not just through the sports activities, but through the other things too. again, I think a lot of it has to do with the intentionality. You have to be intentional about that. That's something that it has to be important to the homeschool parent. I need to make sure my kid is still getting this. I do not feel like homeschool kids are sheltered. As a matter of fact, I think that they end up being involved and taught things that are very diverse in counterpart to, okay, we're in school. This is what we're going to say, period, the end.
Right.
They're being allowed a lot more opportunities to see different walks of life, to learn different kinds of things. The other thing too that I have to tell parents often is that before you get too scared about like, okay, well, if I keep my kid home, then they're not going to go to school and meet all these people and have all these experiences. Not all experiences are good. You know, you don't always want your child around everyone. You know, we have this like what really old saying, like one bad apple ruins the whole bunch, right?
Right.
There's a lot of truth to that. And just because you send your child into a school environment doesn't mean that they're going to be socializing with other children that you necessarily want influencing them. So it is sort of a dainty walk between having those experiences, but then also protecting them some without sheltering them. The nice thing about homeschooling is that you get to choose those experiences.
Right.
So if you put your child into, you know, a certain group or a certain whatever, and you don't like how that's working out, you don't like the kind of children they're interacting with, maybe those families are jiving with you, or, you know, there's some sort of problem, then you just simply remove yourself and find another group. You're not stuck there. So all socialization is not always a positive thing when it comes, and we all know that. The three of us have been in public school. I'm sure that you guys are sitting here thinking back on like, hey, you know what? Yeah, being around certain, you know, elements were very, you know, educational for me. It taught me a lot of life experience, right? But then you're also thinking, there was a lot of it that was really unnecessary that I didn't really learn that much from and could have done without.
Well, the same. So
it prohibits education, actually.
Sure. I was thinking of our experiences with our own daughter, and we said, hey, you know, public school is fine for us and it'll be fine for her, and go, and everything will be a teaching moment. But you bring up a good point to say that those teaching moments could be reduced, yeah, to a certain degree, to where the ones that you have could be better explained, or more informational, or better educational.
Yeah, a lot more fulfilling.
A lot more fulfilling. Yeah. That's the best way to say it. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean, like I said, that you shelter your child, but
correct.
You know, I don't subscribe to the fact that, but there's this huge benefit to shocking them. So, like I said, it's sort of a dainty walk. Like, let's don't shelter them, but let's also don't shock them.
Right.
You know, they don't need to do that. And, you know, I'm perfectly fine with saying that. I grew up in Lexington and went to all Title I schools. So I can tell you, yes, there was a ton of benefit for me growing up and going to Title I schools. It molded who I became. It taught me a lot about people. It made me very open-minded. It made me very accepting of all people. But it was also shocking at times, and very unnecessary, and also very prohibitive of education, because especially nowadays, when I was in school, they tended to isolate the children who were causing those bigger problems. And I can tell you that is no longer the philosophy. The philosophy now is not to isolate those children, but to keep them integrated into the regular classroom. And one child can disrupt all learning for everyone involved.
For everyone.
And I could go on about that the rest of the night. It's specific incidents that I know of where teachers really don't know what to do. You know, I've got a classroom of kids, 28 of them are fine, want to learn, I can do this. And I've got 2 that will not sit down, will not shut up. They're cussing, they're throwing, they're this, they're that. What do? Put a security officer in every classroom? They don't have the money for that.
Yeah, that's not.
So those 2 people are so disruptive. You know, this constant stopping. They can't get through the material. Is that fair to the other 28?
Right.
What do you do though?
Right.
There's nothing to do. They're not going to come up with a solution for you on that, by the way. They'll be like, oh, we'll send a social worker there. We'll try to work on this. But oftentimes what they do is they say, oh, but you know, we know these 2 children. They come from a really bad home environment and they've got this really terrible situation. And that's heart wrenching. And it's like, oh, we want to do something about this. But do we do that and then cause the other 28 kids to pay for that?
Right. And every parent says, no, I don't want my
not.
child to do that. That's right.
That's right. I do not. No, it's not fair to the other 28. That is not leveling the playing field. That's not fair. No.
Amanda, what else do we need to talk about? I think this is we've covered a lot, but at the same time, I don't know that we've even really scratched the surface of how deep we really can kind of get with it. There's a bunch in here. Let's talk about any other big topics before we get to links and stuff. Anything else we haven't covered that you want to get out here today?
I don't think so. I feel like we've covered a lot of the big stuff.
My gosh, we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to learn more, where do they go? How do they learn more about this?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you guys the links to put in your show notes today to where people can join my Facebook group if they would like to. And I feel like that I've at least tried to provide, like I said, very simple how to post, and then also very short videos, because the things that I really focus on my group is how to get started and record keeping. That is extremely important. And I've had to work with a lot of families, especially on the heels of the pandemic, when they wanted to re-enter their children into school. Like, oh, we really didn't keep records. I'm like, oh, you can do that. Record keeping is very important. And so I did, some videos on that, because I feel like those two things are we want to stay in compliance. It's very important for parents to stay in compliance with the law, for the benefit of their child's education, and also to not find themselves in trouble. And I sort of rely on the rest of the group, the posting and the thread, to fill in the curriculum and the ideas and the options and all the, philosophies on education. So I feel like my group is a good place to do that. And then also too, I'm going to give you guys the link, which Amanda might be able to pull that up. The link that you can go to that will take you directly to the Department of Education's document on what is required in Kentucky.
U.S. Department or Kentucky?
It is specific to Kentucky. And what is required in Kentucky, let's see, I might actually be able to find it. There we go. So that's going to go, and let's see if it'll take me right there. education.ky.gov, but I'm trying to figure out, I feel like there's more to.
Yeah, we'll find the link and we'll put it in.
Yeah, and I'm going to send that to you too, like I said, so you can put it into your show notes. And I'm looking at it right now too, and it is 6 pages. That's what I thought. And the 6 pages is the sample letter. Like I said, that has been my Bible for 10 years. If you read this, you stay in compliant. It's the homeschool information packet that is provided by the Kentucky Department of Education. If you read that, stick to that, you are in compliance. You are okay. They cannot force you to do anything outside of that. That is what the law says.
This isn't that scary of a topic then.
No. It's not. I mean, I'm glad that Kentucky has made it very simple.
Yeah, we're very fortunate for that.
Yes, we're very fortunate for that. Other states, and yes, Amanda's got it pulled up. Other states are not that simple. So. Okay,
so we'll put it says homeschool information packet. Looks like a PDF document of some sort. So.
And you notice that it was revised, was it 2021? But they didn't change any laws. They just, I think, simplified the wording a little bit, expanded a little bit. Yeah.
So then your recommendation for anybody listening is join some groups, find some Facebook groups. We'll put a link to your group.
That'd be great. Okay? Yep.
Of course, you're going to administer the group, not let anybody.
Yes, no crazies in. Yeah, and then also too, I think a couple things that I personally, just as my own personal, because everybody has a different philosophy on how. There's a lot of philosophies on education, which is a good place for new homeschool parents to start. Like I said, we've been pigeonholed into what the public school does, what Common Core. I'm trying to think what they called it before Common Core. I mean, they've always got a word for it. We're like, oh, this is it. This is the only way to do it. There's lots of philosophies on education. One of my personal favorites is the Charlotte Mason method, and I feel like that is worth mentioning. Charlotte Mason method does tend to, because when it was created by Charlotte Mason, it was heavy on incorporating Christianity and a religious element, but you can do the Charlotte Mason method without incorporating that. But her standard, her philosophy, and kind of the outline of what a typical day looks like, what education looks like from year to year, depending on the age of the child, is absolutely my favorite. And, people were educated forever with the Charlotte Mason method. That is one of my absolute favorite ways, and I think especially for a beginner, if you kind of Google Charlotte Mason method, you start diving into that. Then you kind of expand on that. Like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to add this. I'm going to add that. I'm going to take this away. Make it your own. You don't have to do exactly, what everybody says. Another company that actually uses the Charlotte Mason method, but, kind of expands on that, modern day, and sells some curriculum is called Simply Charlotte Mason. And they are one of my favorite websites. And they have really, really great videos on every element to the Charlotte Mason method. Again, it does have a very Christian leaning, a huge Christian component to it. But I would like to say for anybody that's listening, that's like, oh, I don't want any kind of, Christian element in my homeschooling, please just still check it out, because you can omit that part of it. I do feel like that Simply Charlotte Mason does a really, really good job of explaining the philosophy, the breakdown of what the day looks like. And I think that it is one of the best forms, one of the best methodologies for teaching children.
Yeah. There's so much here to take in.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like we've covered a ton of ground, and equally, I feel like anybody that would be listening is like, I still have 1,000 questions left to go, but
it's like, go to the internet. Normally I wouldn't say that.
What I'm hearing is the flexibility of it, and the ability to do a lot of different things that maybe your child wouldn't have the opportunity to do.
And there is community there. That's the other thing I think it's important for people to know. The community is there. It seems isolating in people's minds, but the community is there. And not just with in my community, we talked about that, my group, how many families we have, how many of us go on field trips. I've made some of the greatest friends through these field trips. I mean, people that are now like in my closest inner circle of friends. That community is there, but not just with my group. There's other groups. Like, the community is there. I promise you, it absolutely is. And even if you're like, well, I'm not like this family or that. No, your community is there somewhere. There are so many different types of people homeschooling now. You will find your community if you intentionally seek it.
Yeah. It's isolating only because it's unknown.
That's right. Because it's unknown and it's foreign to our way of thinking.
Yeah. My gosh.
But it's there. And thank goodness for social media. It's one of the few things about social media that I think is a positive.
Yeah, that's the truth.
It's connected the homeschoolers. Yeah.
So we've got a whole lot of other stuff to talk about. Will you come back and talk about some other topics that I know that you're involved in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. We need to get that scheduled, and there's a lot more to learn from you, and there's a lot more to dig into, and hopefully we can get that scheduled and have you come back.
Yeah.
Hopefully that you will. We'll gather a bunch of links from you and a bunch of resources from you that we can put. I feel like this particular topic has a whole lot of crap that we can put in the show notes to say for resources to go here for people that are interested in it.
Yeah. And one thing too, when you start down that road, you go to, it's like I'm saying, go to Simply Charlotte Mason, and then that's going to lead you somewhere else. Go to their Facebook group of Simply Charlotte Mason. You're going to learn about this. You're going to learn about 1,000 hours outside challenge. You're going to learn about all these different, there's just all these different curriculums and groups. Like you just start connecting one to another. And it's exciting too, once you get over the hump, to be like, oh, wow, there's so many cool things I can do,
We would research our kids' favorite travel softball team, right? Why would we not do the same research for their curriculum?
The same thing with their curriculum and their interests,
Yeah. Miss Amanda, anything else we need to cover here tonight?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
We're good.
You'll come back for other topics?
I will, absolutely will.
That's awesome. All right, well, that was a lot. That was a lot to cover. I can't thank you enough. I think it was super informative and
thank you.
Super interesting. So I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you, David.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.